Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the June 7th, 2016 meeting of the Los Gatos Town Council. If you haven't already done so, please silence your devices. And Madam Clerk, if you'll please call the roll.
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Marcia Jensen.
Here.
Councilmember Rob Rennie.
Here.
Councilmember Steve Leonardis.
Here.
Vice Mayor Mariko Sayak.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Barbara Spector.
Here. At every meeting, we ask a stellar student of our community to come up and lead us in the flag salute. This evening, that person is Annabelle Arthur. Annabelle, come on up. Let me tell you a little bit about Annabelle and why she was selected this evening. She is, well, first of all, this isn't why she was selected. This is like a side note. But her mom, who's sitting up there taking photos so they can put it on her Facebook page, is Lynn Lampros, who is our deputy town attorney. Hi, Lynn. But Annabelle is here because of Annabelle. Annabelle is in the 8th grade at St. Andrew's School in Saratoga, and in fact, she will be graduating tomorrow. Is that right? And she will be attending high school at Notre Dame in San Jose. She is a volleyball player. She rides horses. She loves photography. This was a biggie. She loves photography. And as far as her community service, she's a volunteer. She does many things, but amongst those, she helps special needs kids, and she reads with students in low-income schools in East San Jose. Now, I wanted to know a little bit more about Annabelle, so I chatted with her, before the meeting, and I found out, the kinds of things that I like to find out. Annabelle has 3 cats and 1 dog, and her cats' names are Fluffy, Toes, and Johnny, and her dog's name is Coco. Let's give a round of applause. And please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's give her another round of applause. And I can tell Lynn's a happy, proud mom. Now we get to the fun part of the evening. I think it's the fun part of the evening. Maybe everybody up here wants to get into the very difficult agenda items, but I like this. First of all, the presentations for the Music in the Park volunteers. But before we get that, I just want to chat a little bit about the Music in the Park function that we have been having in Los Gatos over the summers for 20 years in our lawn out here. Now, since 2009, is this on? Okay. Since 2009, the organization that has been organizing Music in the Park for all of us has been the Los Gatos Music and Arts Organization. And for those of us who have been, my husband and I have been going to the Music in the Park for probably just about the whole 20 years. And for those of us who go, and probably you too, you just, get out of your house sometime around 4:30 or so on Sunday, and you walk on over and you sit down and you enjoy the event, and then when it's over, you get up and you walk back home. Except for the fact that while we're sitting there enjoying the music, we have to think about the fact for this entire 20 years, there have been all of these volunteers, and we don't even see these volunteers generally. There have been all these volunteers who have been getting the bands, organizing the bands, getting the sponsors, setting up the tents, making sure that there's order in there's no problems with dogs or people or killing the lawn by putting blankets on it. So somebody is doing all of that while all we do is walk over, enjoy the music, and leave. And there have been many, many, many volunteers who have done that. And so I asked earlier this year, I asked Jonathan Knowles to give me a list of the volunteers, which he did. And I want to really give a shout out to our staff because I asked them to find either the street address or the email address for all of those volunteers. And they found many, but they couldn't find all. And so then I was able to either send a snail mail or an email to all of the ones whose addresses we had, thanking them for their work over the past 9 years. And I also asked that those whose address we didn't have, if you happen to know of somebody and they weren't contacted, to let them know. And then I asked if volunteers that were available, because we want to give them our appreciation, if they would come here tonight. And I know they're not all here, but will those of you who have volunteered for Music in the Park and who are here tonight, please stand. And let's give them a round of applause. Another Facebook photo. The council and I have also joined together to prepare for the Music in the Park, the Music and Arts Organization, a commendation. And I understand that some members of the board are here. And so I understand, and if you'll please come forward, that Jonathan Knowles is here, Terry Hope, and I know that you're back there, Elkie Groves, but I don't know if you can join us here, can you? You're going to get here. Wow. Okay, well, we have time. The other two members of the board is Joanne Telesfor, who cannot be here this evening, Victoria Trammell, and I got a letter from Ken Canizaro, who told me he can't be here this evening because he and his wife have moved to Washington, and he says he's going to miss Los Gatos and to say hello to all of you who are here. So at this point, I would like to, I gather one of you is going to come up and get the commendation that, of course, Terry Hope. There we go. And another member of the board, like Jonathan Knowles, is going to say a few words.
Thank you. The first thing is, thank you, Mayor Spector. You have been, I think, at more Music in the Parks than any other council member in the history of Music in the Park.
Probably have.
Over the last many years that it's been going. And it's just been great because you have been a strong supporter of the arts in our community in the many years that you have served on the council and the multiple times you've served as mayor. So from the volunteers to you, thank you very much for what you've done to stand behind making this important community thing happen continually every year. And as you mentioned, not all the volunteers can be here. It's close to 30 people that actually work year-round to make that happen. And, of course, we were doing both, Jazz on the Plaza and Music in the Park. And then tonight, of course, you have some of the folks who are taking it over from us. So it's great that it's going to continue and hopefully get even better. Hard to imagine how it could, but we're looking forward to continuing that tradition here in the town. And the advisory board that we have that you've recognized here tonight are sincerely appreciative of you and the entire council and to the residents of this community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And since I know there are representatives of the successor corporation who will be putting on Music in the Park, you've thrown down the gauntlet, telling them that you don't know if it could be any better. But I have a feeling that there are a couple people back there who think maybe it can be. We now have another, what I consider a very favorable, interesting, upbeat kind of presentation, and that is commending our outgoing student commissioners. What I will be doing is, I understand that Chief Frisbee, will you be joining me up here with the names? And here's the plan. We'll see if it works. He has an updated list of names. I have the commendations in order. So he's going to call a name. The person whose name he calls is going to come up here, and I'm going to shake your hand and give you the commendation. So we'll see how this works. And then after that, I know that the members of the Youth Commission have an award of their own to give. But I just want to give a special call out to this Youth Commission, these individuals who will be leaving us, because every year our Youth Commission does some wonderful things, and this year it was no different. It was wonderful. This is the group that recommended to the council that we have a smoking ordinance for the town of Los Gatos. That smoking ordinance is one of the strongest that I've ever seen anywhere. And this council took your recommendation, and that ordinance has been adopted for the town of Los Gatos. So let's give a round of applause to all of them. All right, Molly Ball.
Hunte Bunn. Caitlin Huang. Crystal Huang. Sabrina Kuta. And Parth Pendukar. I think you're good.
Thank you. Let's give a round of applause to all of these folks. Now, I understand that you have an award to give, and I don't know who's going to be speaking for the group or how you're going to do this, but you know what? I'm just going to turn the mic over to you because I know you know how to handle it.
So hi guys, my name is Crystal and I'm the Vice Chair of the Youth Commission. And so the Los Gatos Youth Commission is a group of teens that advises the town council on matters that involve the youth in Los Gatos. And the Youth Friendly Business Program was designed to recognize and thank local businesses for outstanding customer service towards youth and for helping youth in the community. A youth-friendly business is any business that creates a positive atmosphere, provides excellent customer service for youth, and supports youth in the community. This may include hosting or funding events for youth, hiring youth, accepting youth volunteers, or simply providing a service or product for the youth. Each year, the Youth Commission will choose one of the youth-friendly businesses to be the Youth-Friendly Business of the Year. The Youth-Friendly Business of the Year is the business that makes the best effort to help and support youth in the business and in the community. It may do anything from going out of its way to make youth feel welcome to funding various sports teams in the community. This year, the Youth Commission is proud to announce that it selected the Los Gatos Theater as a 2016 Youth-Friendly Business of the Year. Over the past year, the team at Los Gatos Theater has hired youth in the community, supported youth-oriented functions, and provides a welcoming environment for the youth. Please join the Youth Commission in honoring the Getz family and the Los Gatos Theater as a 2016 Youth-Friendly Business of the Year.
Thank you, Youth Commission, for giving us this award. Obviously, we went into the endeavor of buying the theater or renovating it in order to have a place in town for our teens and youth to go. So we're glad that, obviously, you recognize that, and we're glad we did it. So.
We'll give everybody who's getting or gave an award a chance to leave. He didn't get an award. All right, now moving on to our regular agenda. Our next item is our closed session report.
There was no closed session, so there's nothing to report.
Next, we have the council town manager reports, beginning with council reports. Ms. Jensen.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I, along with the Vice Mayor, attended a meeting of the Policy Committee where we considered various things to bring forward to the council.
Thank you. Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I have a long list, so I'll keep most of them very brief. May 19th, I attended the ABAG General Assembly merger with MTC discussion in Oakland. We voted to recommend to ABAG Executive Board they negotiate to hold off the merger until a new governance structure could be designed for the merged agency, and if that is not successful, they have the option to go with a stepped approach where the director of the agency reports only dotted line to ABAG and solid line to MTC Board, with the idea that in the future it would come solid to both. On May 23rd, I attended the VTA SR 85 Quarter Policy Advisory Board. May 23rd, I also attended the Ad Hoc Parking and Infrastructure Committee with the Mayor. On May 25th, I met with the Chair and the CEO of our new Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority for about 2 hours. On May 26th, I attended the Emergency Operating Area Council, where I'm an alternate. On June 1st, I received a debrief on the polling for the Los Gatos tax measure. On June 2nd, I attended the VTA board meeting and spoke 2 times In advocation of items and the proposed items for VTA vote, I advocated for what I believe Los Gatos' position would be, but with the disclosure that our council had not voted and my comments were my own. This included the purchase of the light rail right-of-way with the plan to create a private bus park and ride for Google and Apple buses and others until such time as light rail station is built. I also attended the Silicon Valley Energy Summit at Stanford on June 3rd. And today I walked the site of future street repairs and received a tutorial from the director, Morley, when he showed me the different markings on the street and different repair to be done, such as dig outs, leveling, and crack repair. Thank you.
Thank you. Since the last meeting with other mayors, I made a presentation to Silvar on various town developments. I was at the Kiwanis Student Turnaround event. I also attended the Parking Infrastructure Ad Hoc Committee meeting. I did a real estate development presentation to Elaine Pinnell. I attended a planning meeting for the Listowel Literary Event, which is to occur in October. Along with Mr. Morley, I attended the Silicon Valley Leadership Group Sales Tax Transportation meeting. Along with the Vice Mayor, presented the graduates of Los Gatos Leadership Group with their diplomas for this year, and represented the town of Los Gatos as its mayor at the Memorial Day ceremony at Los Gatos Memorial Park. Ms. Sayak.
Since our last meeting, we mentioned the Los Gatos Turnaround Scholarship Luncheon. I attended a briefing for Silicon Valley at Home that discussed affordable housing and options and alternatives available to councils. Attended the Adopt a Highway cleanup that many of us have been participating in. It's cleanup of the interchanges at Highway 9 and Highway 17. And in addition to those, I've also attended the Ad Hoc Citizens Committee meeting, the Policy Committee meeting, and the Police Foundation meeting yesterday. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Since our last meeting, I also attended the Ad Hoc Citizens Committee meeting and participated in the highway cleanup.
Thank you. Manager Matters.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'd like to report that our summer reading program is off to a full start. We have reading programs available for all ages, including adults, and we encourage the community to participate. More information is available at the library website. We are scheduled to have the North 40 study session next Wednesday on June 15th in these chambers. Information is available on our town website, and the community members are welcome to submit questions and comments in advance. And then third, we have moved the North 40 model to the library, so community members who are interested in seeing it can still view it at the library. Thank you.
Thank you. We now have our consent items. Tonight they consist of agenda items 1 through 7. We will begin with the council to see if anybody from the council wishes to remove an item from the consent calendar. Seeing no one, Ms. Sayak.
Thank you, Mayor. I will not be removing anything, but do want to disclose that I will be recusing myself from item number 2.
Ms. Sayak is recusing herself from the student commissioner appointments because she has a conflict of interest since it includes her daughter on that list. All right, now people in the audience may wish to remove an item from the consent calendar. I don't have any cards. Does anybody want to remove an item from the consent calendar?
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
I got the verbal communications. Consent calendar removal. Seeing no one, may I have a motion? Ms. Jensen.
Move approval of the consent calendar with any terms and conditions that are contained in the staff reports for item 1 through 7.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, motion and second. Discussion. Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously with an abstention on number 2 by the Vice Mayor. Verbal communications. If anybody wants to speak to us on verbal communications, please submit a card. I have one card. John Shepherdson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. John Shepherdson, 120 Oak Rim Way, Los Gatos. So many years ago, myself and actually your town attorney, we both attended John Wooden's basketball camp. at different times, but we did attend it. And Coach Wooden had a definition of success. It was called peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction and knowing you did your best to become the best that you are capable of becoming. I want Los Gatos to do its best to be the best it can be. I believe Los Gatos is a great community and that it can do much more if the town of Los Gatos did an even better job of leveraging its assets. For starters, we must recognize our problems. We have $54 million in pension and employment unfunded liabilities. The pension liability was zero in 2003. We have a sacred obligation to our former government employees, including police officers, to honor their pensions. We must meet that challenge. 20% of our roads are in poor or very poor condition. Now, we can cut services to get our budget under control. We can raise taxes, or there is a third way. I propose the third way, which is we make better use of the resources that we have. How so? That we have a third-party review of the entire budget to get the most for the taxes paid in. If, for example, Cupertino can police its community for $10 million and be rated safer than Los Gatos and have comparable response times, I believe Los Gatos can too. We have the potential to save $5 to $10 million a year with the sheriff option. However, many people don't want to make that switch. Fine. A third way is to make our police department more efficient so that we can afford to keep it. In sum, we are facing a tidal wave of debt. Our roads are crumbling. We are Los Gatos. We can do better. If we get our fiscal house in order, we can do so many grand things. We can lead in the green revolution with solar panels on the government building, electric vehicles, more electric chargers, more green bike lanes. We can afford downtown garages, support a Danville-like busing program, support the Los Gatos Rec Department, fix our roads, pay off earlier the mounting debt, make our downtown sparkle. Perhaps shuttles between the North 40 and the downtown, provide more staff to speed up the time so that we can remodel our homes more quickly, provide funding for our schools, or provide more traffic mitigation like smart traffic lights. Managing our resources better will take the tremendous pressure off the town government to approve large projects because we are presently so badly in need of money to pay for town resources. I ask the town council to set aside monies now in the budget to fund a third-party independent review of the entire budget and provide options as to how more efficiently provide those town services.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none. I don't have any other cards. Anybody else on verbal communications? Seeing no one, I just wanted to make note that as part of our consent calendar, we had agenda item 2, where we approved and accepted all of the individuals who were nominated for the Student Commission. Are there any people here who are from our new Student Commission? If you are, please stand. Please stand. Let's give them a round of applause. And as your first lesson in civics, or maybe it's not your first, you were approved on the consent calendar. We're really glad to have you here. You can stay and listen to all or part of our meeting, or if you wish, you can leave. But thank you very much. All right, now on to public hearings. Agenda item 8, order abatement of hazardous vegetation, brush, after opening and closing the public hearing. Do we have a staff report? Thank you.
Lisa Peterson, Town Engineer. This is our annual brush abatement program that we do every year with Santa Clara County. The town annually does declare hazardous vegetation as a nuisance due to the fire hazards. We do enter into a contract with the county to abate these hazardous vegetation that is not removed by the property owners. And that is the end of my presentation. I can take any questions if there are any.
Do we have questions? Seeing none, this is a public hearing. I don't have a card, but does anyone wish to address us on Agenda Item 8, the abatement issue? No one's coming forward. I'll close the public testimony portion of this hearing and look to the council members for a motion. Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I move that we order the abatement of hazardous vegetation, otherwise known as weeds.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion. Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Agenda Item 9. Conditional Use Permit Application U16003. This is for property located at 22 South Santa Cruz Avenue. And the applicants are Rick and Shelley Ballard. We have a staff report over there. Yes, I'm used to having you over here. I'll get used to it.
Good evening, Jocelyn Puga, Assistant Planner. Good evening, Mayor and Council members. The subject site is located on the west side of South Santa Cruz Avenue at the corner of Broadway and South Santa Cruz. The applicant is requesting approval to operate group cooking classes with beer and wine service and alternating use of parking. The applicant is requesting approval to merge 2 vacant ground floor spaces into one 1,475 square foot space. The applicant's requesting to operate from 10 a.m. until 9 p.m. 7 days a week. The Planning Commission considered the application on May 11th. The Planning Commission forwarded a recommendation of approval to the Town Council, subject to modified conditions of approval that are discussed on page 4 of your staff report this evening. In addition, the applicant submitted a letter in response to these modified conditions of approval that's included as Attachment 6 in your packet this evening. Staff recommends the Town Council accept the Planning Commission's recommendation and adopt the resolution contained in Attachment 7 with the conditions provided in Exhibit A. There is a desk item before you this evening which contains staff's responses to council members' questions in addition to public comments received after the distribution of the staff report. This completes staff's presentation, and we are available for any questions along with the Economic Vitality Coordinator.
Thank you. Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I'd like to lead us through something. So you responded to my question about whether the table should have been included or whether the motion in Attachment 7, or it's not a motion, the ordinance in Attachment 7 accurately captures what the motion from the Planning Commission was, and I'm still in disagreement, so I want to lead you through why, and then you could either tell me why I'm wrong, or perhaps it's unclear, or some other answer. So if the council would like to follow along, I'm starting in Attachment 3 on page 93. Before this, Commissioner Hudes has made a motion which has many things in it, but it includes where he talks about the maximum number of students and staff during the day and then in the evenings on weekends. And he wanted to take off the top line of the table, which happens to be in Attachment 5, I believe it is, or Exhibit 5 in Attachment 1, I believe is where it is. But on page 93, after he's made this, there's some continued discussion where Commissioner Hudes says, well, you end up with a 313, he's referring to the evening student staff, and then is 34 and 28 and 4, which is the next one down, is only 32. So he's referring to this table, and what he wanted to do when he said maximum, I believe, is the maximum on the table was 31 and 3, 16 and 2. If I continue down to page 94, just before that, Director Polson restates the motion, and in the motion he talks about maximums of 16 students and 2 instructors, maximum of 31 students and 3 instructors. So he's thinking that's the maximum, and that's what you wrote in the ordinance I think it's 7 and 8, items 7 and 8 in the ordinance. Then immediately after he says that, Commissioner Hudes, who made the motion, says, with respect to, get out of the way here, maxims, would it be to include the full table that gets into the ratios as well? So he's continuing to talk about the table, not just the 16-2 and 3-1. And then Director Polson says, adding a reference to that chart. Commissioner Hudes says, correct. Director Polson says, okay. So it continues to look to me like the intention is for the chart, not a maximum of 2 instructors ever. The applicant wanted to be able to adjust for more instructors and reduce students by 3. That seemed to be the intention, and from all the minutes that I read, that seemed to be the intention, but that's not what ended up in the ordinance in attachment 7, I believe it is. Please respond.
All right, so we have a question, as I understand. Well, I don't understand the question, and so I'm going to ask staff to please begin by giving us the question you think you're answering, and then please answer it. And I should also note that I also submitted questions to staff with regard to this and a related issue.
So I believe your question is that the motion made by Commissioner Hudes was to include this table rather than set maximums as staff has done in the resolution. And so from the meeting and going through the minutes once again, looking at the language, when the commissioner states maximums, generally that's going to be a maximum of instructors and a maximum of staff. So whether the commissioners understood in their motion that they were setting maximums and eliminating the sliding scale is unknown. By reviewing the minutes and from the meeting, it was a maximum that staff understood as part of the motion. If the council disagrees and chooses to use that table or a sliding scale, they may do so.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make it a little clearer to the other council members that I didn't think that was right. Thank you.
All right, well, it's still not clear to me. And so where is the, I guess what you're going to direct me to, I'll ask, is there a certain item on the resolution, or where is this issue addressed? And let me also ask you, were there approved minutes from the Planning Commission meeting?
There are approved minutes. They're attachment 3 in your packet. And then let me find where in the resolution you're referencing.
If I could add to it, it's in attachment 7, appendix A or whatever we call it, and then you've crossed out lines 6 and 9 and added 7 and 8.
So that's correct. So we've crossed out the conditions of approval that were reviewed by the Planning Commission for your reference and looking at Exhibit A, and included conditions 7 and 8, which include those maximums. So if you decide to move forward with the sliding scale, you would just eliminate conditions 7 and 8 and move forward with conditions 6 and 9.
So if I'm looking at Exhibit A of Attachment 7, the 7 and 8, which are in bold, reflect the Planning Commission's motion, correct?
Correct.
And then you have drawn lines through the prior 9, and so that was eliminated because it's not consistent with the Planning Commission.
That's correct.
And then 10, 11, and 12, let's just stop there. Those are all reflect the Planning Commission.
So all of the bolded conditions reflect the Planning Commission's recommendation.
Other questions? Seeing none. And do you staff have anything else there on this item? No. If there's anybody who wants to address us on this item, please submit a card. I know that we have, I have several cards, and I know that at least in part they reflect the applicant. So I am assuming that 2 of these cards, Rick and Shally Ballard, are the applicants. And so come on up and you will have 10 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Spector, and the rest of the council. It's been since, I guess, last spring when we met with each of you to show you our business and express our desire to move to Los Gatos, to open a new location in Los Gatos. So we're happy to finally be here and to be able to present. As you've seen, I think, and I don't want to spend too much time because I know you have all the documents. We have a location in Willow Glen. Cucina Bambini is a cooking school and event venue. We've been, since 2008, we've been in Willow Glen. We do birthday parties, corporate events, basically classes and parties cooking for all ages 3 to adult. We have been looking for quite some time at Los Gatos because we think it would be such a great fit. I mean, we've looked, both my wife and I grew up in the area, and ever since we opened, even before we opened Willow Glen, we knew that Los Gatos would be a great location, a great fit, just because we're very family friendly, youth friendly, and also all of the local businesses and corporate type events and parties and things that we do are just, it just seems like a natural fit. Maybe I would just, rather than going through all the different types of events and everything that's in my letter, it might help just a little bit to show kind of the floor plan of what we plan on doing. I know that some of you have actually been to our location already in Willow Glen. So we're looking at opening at 22 South Santa Cruz, which is right across from the park, next to Willow Street Pizza. Taking up locations that were previously a hair salon. It's next to a hair salon. Taking over, it was a dry cleaner and a flower shop over the years, different things, combining those two spaces. Just to orient you, this right here is South Santa Cruz, and this is Broadway right over here. So what kind of makes us unique? There are other people that do cooking classes. What makes it unique is that we cater to and are specifically tailored for all ages. For those of you that have seen our location, you can see that it's an open, very flexible plan. So this kitchen area here is fixed, and this island here is fixed with an overhead screen, and it looks like a cooking set, like you might see on TV from a cooking show, like a Guy Fieri or Rachel Ray type show. Very fun, lots of characters on the walls and things like that. But then around here, it's basically an open area. These are just modular tables, stainless steel work tables that we can move in any place for any type of class or event. Typically, during the week, we have primarily young chef type little kids classes for ages 3 to 5. In the mornings, during the day, we may have homeschool type classes. We have series for teens and other homeschoolers. Afternoons are typically after school classes, cooking type things. And then in the evenings, it varies quite a bit. Sometimes it's adult cooking classes, could be pasta classes, Thai food, anything like that. And then it's several evenings during the week we have adult events where it's a corporate event, a private event, or a family dinner party, or anything like that where they can cook anything. We have a range of menu items. And then on the weekends, primarily the weekends are kids' birthday parties for the most part, Saturday and Sunday all day. Our current location in Willow Glen, we have 2 kitchens, so we're able to have overlapping parties at both. This one, we'll have one primary kitchen, and then this is a flex space that can be used as sort of an overflow eating area and occasional other activities, and then a lot of retail space. So this location is a little smaller than our other one, but we think the proximity, especially across the street from the park and where you have the farmers market on the weekends, gives us a great opportunity to have sort of farm to table type classes and start working with local businesses. Sometimes we work with local restaurants and chefs to have them come and teach a class and bring their local people in. We've done that in Willow Glen. We'd love to do that in Los Gatos. So it's a unique opportunity. Like I said, I know there's other cooking, Sur La Table has cooking classes as well, but this is very different, and that's what we do. We do have some retail. Some of the retail focuses on, kitchen gadgets, cooking kits, apparel, pasta machines, because we do a lot of pasta classes, things like that. But it's not a cooking store like Sur La Table, for example. So that's kind of an overview of what we do. in the floor plan. I guess I would address just a little bit, if I have time, the conditions, and I agree with Councilmember Rennie, his interpretation. I was actually a little surprised when I saw. I understand why, because the Planning Commission meeting was quite long, and we got into a lot of detail and things that I didn't quite expect. And some of that is probably my fault for thinking that the town parking code and formula is the code formula. So if you have an additional staff member, then the number of clients or customers would reduce by 3, just like the code says. So that apparently was confusing for people. So I will defer to the council on how you want to handle that. But our recommendation, our hope was, and this I'm jumping to condition number 6, I guess, on the parking. Based on the parking, that building has 20 spots allocated to it. There are 7.58 or so, 7.58 that are available to our business. If you take one for each staff member, according to the town code, you require 1 per each staff member and then 3 for each customer. So that's how we developed that table. And I was the table was meant to be an example, and I was expecting a condition to say something like, during the daytime, there shall be a maximum of 19 customers and 1 staff member, provided that for each additional customer or for each additional staff member, the number of customers would reduce by 3. So if we have 2 staff members, we could only have 16, a class for 16 or a party for 16. If we decide to have 3 staff members because it's an appetizer class or something and we have a dishwasher in the back, then we can only have a class of 13, which we're perfectly fine managing. We have a calendar, everything's scheduled in advance. So that caused a lot of confusion. I hope that doesn't continue to cause confusion, but if it does, we can address it however you like. I go through the rest. I don't know how they're numbered in yours, but in my letter that I submitted, I addressed 6 conditions that the Planning Commission set forth. The first 3, I think, were fairly inconsequential. Again, I don't see why, and I have a short period of time, so maybe I'll just kind of skip the first 3 because I want to make sure I can get to the others. Number 4 was no alcohol shall be served when minors are present. And I don't agree with, and I don't quite understand this condition. I mean, if I go with my family to Campo de Bachi, take our staff, which we've done before. We've done a staff annual party to Campo de Bachi, for example. Not to pick one business, but that's a good example because they do similar type things. They don't say, oh, you've got kids in your party, you can't have any alcohol. In fact, they don't. Well, so I don't. We have a California state class 41 beer and wine license. I know of no other business anywhere that has a restriction like this. So if it's applied to other businesses, then we're willing to consider it. But I don't see why it would be applied to us. Number 5, they talk about reviews of the Planning Commission, which again, I don't understand why the Planning Commission would review a business that we have to build out and put money into it 3, 6, 9 months. What are they reviewing? If they're reviewing our compliance with the town code and laws, then I expect you to do that with every business, and we're happy to comply with that. But if there's some reviews that are applied to our business because they think it's a new model or they don't understand, then I don't want the rug pulled out from under us when we've made an investment in the town and building a business. So I would expect that to be, again, fairly applied to all businesses, or at least understandably applied so we know whether or not we comply. What is the review? And then the last one was the parking, and I addressed that earlier. The original 3 I mentioned in my letter, and I think they don't quite make sense to me, but we're complying anyway, so it's fine. Anyway, I didn't mean to end it on a down note. We are very excited. Like I said, it's been a long time coming, and Los Gatos has been our first choice. We're looking at opening other locations in the Bay Area, but this is our first choice. It's close to home. I grew up 5 miles from here. We want to make this work before we really launch and grow our business. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Let's see if we have questions. I think we will. Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So I guess my first question would be on item number 4 on the alcohol restriction. Can you maybe give me on a scale of 1 to 10, how big is the negative effect on your business if this was here, with 10 being the biggest negative effect?
If we don't have alcohol, we won't open the business, basically. So it's not the, it's only makes, it only, alcohol sales only make up about 3% of our overall sales, but it enables us to do adult events, corporate events, family parties, things like that that would otherwise not. When we first opened, we did not have this. When we did, we didn't have our beer and wine license. When we did get our beer and wine license, our business increased by 30%. It made it from a fun little hobby into a real business and something that we want to grow. So it's, for us, it's a go, no go. I mean.
So if I could follow up that, you didn't completely answer the questions, because what's stated here is you could have beer and wine if it was an adult-only event.
Oh, I see.
And obviously, children can't have alcohol anyway, so it's the mixed children and adult is really what it says. So how would that affect your business?
Sorry. It's not a huge number of events. We have, I can't put a number on it, but we have occasional family pizza nights where people can come with their family, make pizza, you know, do cupcakes, kind of the same things that people can do during a birthday party, maybe make pasta. And there are times when the parents want to order wine. We have several times. We've done it with our family, and there's been dozens of families that have come and had a family reunion or a holiday dinner where people, you know, the kids are back in town from college and they all want to get together and they don't want to mess up their own kitchen, so they all come and do something in our place with our instructors and do a fun family event. There are people under 21 and there are parents and they want to have wine. So I can't put a number on how critical it is to our business, or it's hard to say 1 to 10 whether it's important or not. I just think I know of no other business that has this restriction, and I just think it would be arbitrary and unfair to put it on our business.
Could I ask one more?
Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So on number 6 of your submission here, with you called it parking, but it's really about restricting the number of staff. So, how much effect does that have if that were to stay in? You know, we restricted you to 3 staff on, with 31 guests in the evenings and weekends and 2 during the day.
Putting a restriction on staff, it does create a restriction. It makes it really difficult in terms of, there are times we have a new employee coming in and we want them to shadow somebody so they know what's going on. Or we have somebody that especially since we only have one kitchen here, we may want to have somebody coming in and working in the back and preparing goodie boxes and things for the next class, or preparing things. So restricting the staff, it's another one that makes absolutely no sense to me so long as we're complying with the town code. It's a convenient way to state the condition, but it doesn't make sense from a business restriction. Just because it's convenient doesn't mean it should restrict our business, is my position. Again, we got so far into the weeds in this in the Planning Commission that if we can pick a number, if it has to be a solid number, then we'll pick with it. We'll try to pick one and go with it. But we'd like to provide the best possible service to our customers. And when we do so many different types of events and parties that scaling staff, there are times when, according to the town code, like during the daytime, it would be nice. We have occasional events, not very common, but occasional events where it's okay to just have 1 staff member and 19 people. Like in Los Gatos and Willow Glen, we did a town business association kind of an event. We only needed 1 real chef there because it was more of a meeting, really. They did a quick little activity and then they had a meeting. So we could have up to 19. There's no reason we should have 2. For the most part, we would have 2 staff members, but there may be times we want to have 3. So long as we comply with the town code and the parking regulations and we don't go over that, we should be trusted to be responsible in that manner, and we should be okay with that.
Okay, thank you. I'll let other council members ask questions.
Let me follow up sort of on the same thing. If the total number of people in your business is governed by the number of parking spaces, and if the business is required to have at least 1 employee there, is that what you're looking for? As opposed, assume that there's going to be a maximum number of people in the leasehold. and assume that there is going to be a requirement for at least one employee. Is there anything else that you would like or are requesting in your condition of approval?
No, what you're saying is exactly what I was going for, and that seemed like the logical approach to me, was to say, to figure out the formula that was the maximum number of bodies that would be. For each additional staff member we add, the number of bodies would decrease. It's just because there's one parking space for each 3 customers. So I was saying what the maximums were, thinking that there would be some way to craft the statement that says for each additional staff members, the number of customers will go down by 3. But then we got into this parking table and it just got confusing. So again, but what you're saying, I think, is exactly what I was thinking.
All right, and there were a lot of issues. Well, we'll get to that in a second. There were a lot of issues that you and the planning commissioners were dealing with for all kinds of reasons. But having said that, one of them was parking, and this hybrid parking. Do you understand that if that part of your parking allowance is parking credits that you get from the landlord, and if the landlord is using the landlord's offices, then you don't get those parking credits? Did that come through, or do you understand that to be the case?
I understand that the landlord is giving us parking credits. He has it's about nine point something spaces allocated to his upper floor. For the last 18 years, he's had 4 employees there, and that's what he's always had. He closes at 5 o'clock, and just like it says in the town code, and just like a lot of other businesses do, we did a parking agreement where after hours he gave us those credits. There was a lot of discussion about what that means, what it means to be closed, and whether or not he can be there, and whether all the parking credits go away. But it seems to me if those things were important issues, they would be spelled out a little more clearly in the code instead of tested against us.
All right, but if your conditional use permit were conditioned on your getting the credits when your landlord is not utilizing his offices, is that what you understand?
I understand that if the landlord needs to utilize more than the spaces, we're not taking all of his parking. If he's not left with an adequate number of spaces to accommodate the people that are there ever after hours, then I understand that our parking, that we should be decreased. I understand that. I don't read the, and I think the town attorney or deputy attorney agreed with me on the point. I don't think that it means that if somebody stays in his place after hours, that all the parking credits vanish. That doesn't make sense.
All right, and when we finish with the, because I have other cards, when we finish with the testimony, I will, hint, I will be looking to staff to address this issue. If, for example, the landlord, I'm going to make numbers up, has 9 credits and the applicant uses 6 and there are 3 left over, does that mean that the landlord can stay in the premises? Other questions of the applicant? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We do have other speakers. Angelia Dorner.
Hello, I'm Angelia Dorner, a proud resident of the Almond Grove. I just wanted to say that I am so excited about this business opportunity joining our downtown group of merchants. We do not have anything like this. All of last year, going through the strategic goals, we talked about revitalizing our downtown, looking for things that are a destination, a place to go. And I really believe that this thing gives us that. I get my hair done in Willow Glen. Sorry to all the salons in Los Gatos. But I hear a lot about this place. And everything I've ever heard from people I don't even know, the reputation of the owners, the business, and the product, if whatever you want to call the product, is always extremely good. And people always say, great, I'm going to go there. I should consider having our family party there for Uncle Vito or whoever. And I think that Uncle Vito would appreciate having a glass of vino when he has all of his nieces and nephews running around giving him his birthday presents. So I think that that's really the context that I look at this in. I think that corner has always had a lot of issues. It just sort of peters out after you pass Willow Street, and I think it can revitalize that end of downtown in a different way than just a restaurant or something could do by consolidating the spaces. I'm not sure. I just got a sense that we're being a little overly strict on some things compared to some other CUPs that I've seen go through in the last couple of years. And I understand, and I think that the owners understand. I do not know them, but I think that they have shown a great understanding and a great feeling of cooperation in trying to accommodate and meet the regulations and concerns of the Planning Commission and now yourselves. So I'm just really looking forward to having this as a new addition to our downtown. I trust that it will be a very valuable thing and that a lot of people will treat it as a destination place and can actually grow the receptiveness of our downtown to these kinds of businesses. Thank you.
Questions? Seeing none, thank you. John Machado? This is the last card I've been given. If you want to speak on this item, please submit a card.
Good evening. John Machado, 16411 Matilaha Drive, Los Gatos, California. I'm here tonight in support of the Kachina Banchina locating on 22 Santa Cruz Avenue. I work with Mr. Tate, the property owner, and I've worked with him for several years to fill the retail vacancies on the ground floor of his building where he occupies the second level. And the difficulty that we've experienced over the years with the prior tenants being the Orchid Store, several jewelry stores, the dry cleaner drop-off, et cetera, is the lack of foot traffic on that side of Main Street. You know, when you're on Santa Cruz Avenue and you're walking between Santa Cruz, between Highway 9 and Main, there's a lot of foot traffic, a lot of cross traffic. But we very seldom get that traffic on the other side of Main Street. There are approximately 3 or 4 retailers on that side of the street, Ace Hardware, Willow Street Pizza, and a few others. And as you look in your packet, I think you will see that all of those retailers have written letters in support of this approval to generate more traffic. So being a destination retailer where people will seek that area out, we believe will be successful. We're also very excited about the farm-to-table approach. In speaking with the applicants, they've spoken about school projects where they will give kids a certain allowance and they'll go to the farm, the farmer's market, buy certain items and cook those and prepare meals. So we think it's good for the community, it's good for the children, and I'm here to support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions? No, there are no questions. I have no other cards. No one's coming forward, and so I will now go back to the applicants. You have 5 more minutes if you have anything to say.
Thanks. I don't have much to say. I just wanted to say thank you because, as she said, I didn't even catch her last name, Angelina. We've never met, and I never asked anybody to come up and speak on our behalf, so I really appreciate it. And I actually wish that I'd have her speak for me at the beginning because she's very eloquent and said a lot of things I didn't say. So we are, just to say, we're very excited about the opportunity, and we hope you consider it favorably. Thanks.
Let me ask you a question because I'm sure I know the answer, but it's better if somebody just says it.
Okay.
I understand that the Planning Commission, one of their conditions is that there is no alcohol service when there are children present. And that is a concern of yours as far as that condition. What is your feeling, or how would you deal with the fact that there is a family gathering? So there are adults, there are children, all these people are on your premises, and the adults, would you require the adults to be having a meal or substantive food when they have their alcohol? I mean, how would you deal with that?
Yeah, any event where we're serving, every event involves a cooking school, a cooking event venue. So every event involves meals. Any activity where we're actually serving beer and wine involves food. We're not looking to serve beer and wine to parents who come watch a kid's class. We've never been asked that. We would never offer it. We never do. There's plenty of other places people can go, as there's been a couple of letters sent in. People can go to number 1 Broadway or Willow Street or the Burger Joint and order a wine or beer. They don't need to come to our place for that.
All right, other questions? Ms. Sayak.
Thank you. I'm going to focus on the same subject. When this has come up previously with applications, I think one of the issues has been a description of the controls in place with your operation so that whether it's the Planning Commission or the Council, we could be assured that those that are drinking the alcohol are in fact 21 or over. So could you just walk us, let's say my family comes in and I would like to order a bottle of wine, you check my ID. What happens after that so that you're confident that alcohol is not served to minors?
Well, we're serving it to a family. I mean, it's basically just like a restaurant in that respect. You know, we're not a restaurant, but in that respect, it's a restaurant. You would order it from one of our staff members. They would bring it over. If it's a glass, they would deliver it to you. If it's a bottle, they would deliver it to your table and pour the glasses for the adults. We have enough staff members at every event that they're watching, and if they're passing wine over to the children, then, you know, our California state license prohibits that. All of our staff members are trained, and they have to be a proper age to serve, and they know to keep an eye on our customers. The cooking, everything kind of takes place in the view of the staff members. It's not that big of a place. It's not like kids are going to go into some corner and, you know, take mom and dad's bottle of wine. Again, it's not much. I don't know how to say how we control any different than a restaurant would. You know what I mean?
That's all I needed to hear. And just, I know I read it, but at your Willow Glen location, you've had no problems?
Yeah, we've never had any issues, any complaints, any problems of any kind.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
I see no other questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will close the public testimony portion of this public hearing and look to council for questions, discussion. I see Ms. Jensen, but before we go there, I had a pending question, which I would like someone to respond to.
So with the question with the alternating parking, the second floor tenant, who's also the landlord, submitted a letter, which is attachment 4 in your packet, stating what his operating hours of the business are. And he states his operating hours are from 9 to 5. So looking at the section of the code for alternating uses, it states that when the remaining uses are closed, there's no conflict with the businesses. So as the parking agreement staff has, it would be in compliance with the town code as it begins at 5:30, and the property owner has stated that his business closes at 5 p.m.
Thank you. Ms. Jensen.
I was going to try a motion, if that's okay.
Certainly.
And the motion that I would make is to approve the conditional use permit to operate group cooking classes at 22 South Santa Cruz for Cucina Bambini, and that we adopt the resolution that's contained in the staff report at Exhibit 7, but that we, and I hope that the staff will help me because I'm not going to be able to figure out how to say this on the fly, but that the parking should be, and the available personnel, staff, guests, whatever it is, in the space should be appropriate to the time and the parking available, and the town should be encouraging shared parking whenever possible, so we need to, I think, accommodate that. So conditions 6 and 9, I think, ought to be combined in some fashion to reflect that, and hopefully Ms. Bravetti or someone can read us back something that at least makes sense with that. I would delete condition 11 that requires the business to inform people of alternate parking. I have difficulty figuring out how that could happen for various times of the day and various availability, unless they know exactly who's coming, when they're coming, where parking is, it seems to be a pretty onerous condition to put upon a business that we don't have on any other businesses. I have some difficulty with defining meals as in condition 7, but I'm not going to strike it. I'm just going to note as a comment that since we are hopefully someday going to change our alcohol policy, and especially if we have a cooking school, an attempt to define what might constitute a meal there, given that they could be cooking anything, including nachos, including pasta, including whatever, that we're now saying, doesn't somehow qualify as a meal. I have some difficulty with that. I'm not going to strike it all together, but I'm going to note that difficulty. I would delete condition number 15 that prohibits the service of alcohol when minors are present. I don't see any rational basis for including that, especially when it's right next to Willow Street, which has people sitting at tables where adults are drinking and kids are eating pasta or pizza all day long, every day. So it just strikes me that it's quite an onerous condition with no rational basis to impose it. I'm sure that the business owners can take care of what they need to do for their license. With respect to review of the CUP, I'm actually an advocate of reviewing CUPs. I don't think that it's unreasonable, especially if we're expecting that the business is going to comply. Then it's a simple matter of coming in and saying, we've done it at Yahoo. However, I think it ought to be a 1-year review, not as indicated in the Planning Commission. So that's my motion.
All right, we have a motion and we have a lot of hands up. We'll start with Mr. Rennie. What I'm looking for now is there a second?
I would like to second it, but I want to make sure that the part she asked staff to word is what I would like. I believe you need to delete 7 and 8 and then probably just put 6 and 9 back, but I will second after you could maybe tell us exactly how that's going to be.
All right, as I understand it, staff is going to explain to us their recommendation on parking.
So one option would be to, as Councilmember Rennie said, it would be to eliminate 7, 8, and actually 10, and reinstate 6 and 9, because 10 is just a different shared parking agreement, and I would look to Ms. Puga for a confirmation or clarification if necessary.
Before we go there, rather than use these numbers, because quite frankly, your numbering, or not your personal numbering, but the numbering on the draft is confusing. Why don't you just, if you could just verbalize for us what the parking requirements are that you are proposing, and then we'll see if Mr. Rennie and Ms. Jensen agree.
So for parking specifically, based on 1 parking space per instructor and 1 parking space for every 3 students, the number of students and instructors on site at any given time, Monday through Friday, from 10 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. shall not exceed a number that is supported by 7.33 parking spaces. And the parking after 5:30, Monday through Friday, and Saturday and Sunday from 9 to 10 would be not to exceed parking that is supported by 13.33 parking spaces.
I agree with this.
Hold on, Mr. Rennie. As someone who would like to support this motion, I don't find that wording clear. So my support is just sort of out there right now. Ms. Jensen, are you okay with that as your motion?
Well, let me try to make my motion more clear. And I understand that we have a resolution and proposed conditions. They're numbers on page, what is it? It's the first page of Exhibit A of Attachment 7, the conditions of approval. There are numbers, there's a number 7, there's a number 8 that are in bold. And then there is a lined out number 6 and number 9. I understand that what Mr. Paulson is saying and Ms. Puga is saying is simply eliminate 7 and 8 and 10 since the shared parking agreement is superfluous, and I'm fine doing that. However, I agree with the mayor that I think the wording in 6 and 9 is incredibly complicated, and I have trouble imagining what 7.33 parking spaces is or 13.33 parking spaces is. So it seems to me that there should be a condition which indicates there are X number of parking places in the lot. At the time that the business is open, those parking spaces allotted to the business shall not be used for Cucina Bambini, when the business is closed, those parking spaces will become available, and that Cucina Bambini may then use those available spaces. And so that's what I propose, and if the potential seconder is okay with that, then I'll go ahead with the motion.
I'm okay with that.
All right, so we have a motion and a second, and then I have questions of staff. Are we, when we're looking at the parking spaces available to the business after the landlord leaves, are we actually only looking at those on-site parking spaces to, well, I'm not going to say to the side? Is that what we're talking about?
Are you referencing the parking spaces on site?
Yes.
So this would just be parking credits. There are only 3 parking spaces on site. The remaining credits are in the parking assessment district.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. All right. So I'm not going to be able to support the motion, not because I don't want to, but because I don't think it's where we need to go yet. Further discussion? Ms. Sayak.
Okay. In general, I'll be supporting the motion. I'm quite familiar with your operations, having been to your Willow Glen several times, and I do agree with a previous speaker, Ms. Dorner. It is a destination location. It's a location that I know many of my peers have gone to, whether to drop off their kids or to attend classes themselves, and I think it'd be a wonderful mix to our community. The parking, as you probably experienced during the Planning Commission, parking is an issue with our downtown, and I commend them for their thorough analysis. But my concern is when it's complicated for us who understands parking credits and parking ratios, it's far more complicated for the average user. And so I'm always a proponent of let's simplify this, make it somewhat enforceable, because, you know, as Councilmember Johnson said, if you have 7.33 spaces, how does one enforce that? And I think in general, we are becoming more of a community where we are starting to really emphasize the carpooling, the drop-off, and taking an Uber for those that are doing the adult classes that may want to have a beverage. So I understand the concern for parking, but I also understand that this is a restaurant / commercial use that we would want to embrace into our community, and am supportive of the conditional use permit as proposed.
Thank you. The reason I said I wasn't supporting it yet actually has nothing to do with the Planning Commission or with the applicant. It has to do with the wording that this council is putting forward at this time on the parking. And I still don't understand why it has to be as complex as it still is. So if you could just one more time tell me what staff is proposing with regard to the parking required and the distinction between the time that the landlord is and is not there, because I don't think it has to be complex, but just let me hear.
As has been suggested by the motion and the staff, we're essentially deleting conditions, or proposing to delete 7, 8, and 10 and reinstate 6 and 9. So essentially what we're saying is that the number of customers and staff needs to comply with our town code and with the alternate parking arrangement as identified by the property owner. So that's really what the bottom line is. So it essentially would be that sliding scale that the applicant has requested. We could put that in English, I suppose, in terms of translating what 7.33 parking spaces means in terms of a sliding scale. And Joel may be able to do that faster than I could.
And what 7.33 equates to is the table in Exhibit 5. So it's 19 students and 1 instructor, or 16 students and 2 instructors, or 13 students and 3. So along that sliding scale. And from also, I believe Councilwoman Jensen also offered some other language to try to simplify it further, getting to what Town Manager Privetti was speaking to, that the limitations will be based on the available parking at the 2 different time periods.
And before I recognize Ms. Jensen, I really don't think this council should be approving a CUP that has 13.33 parking spaces. Ms. Jensen.
I agree. I was hoping that when I made my last summary that I was eliminating the 7.33 and the 6 and the 13.33 and subbing out conditions 6 and 9. I would love to adopt the language Ms. Pravetti just used, which is comply with town code with respect to parking and the people allowed, and to the extent that that is reflected in Exhibit 5, the chart, then we could incorporate that or attach it to the CUP so that it's very clear. But there's no reason to have the very complex language that is contained in 6 and 9. I assume they have, for example, let's say hypothetically they have 10 parking spaces. Okay, then figure it out for town code what that's going to be. And that's hopefully the gist of what I want to make my motion contain as a condition.
All right, and now I'll go to the seconder, Mr. Rennie. You agree with that?
I agree. Yeah, keeping it simple is better.
And then I'm going to go back to staff because I want to support this motion. Are we going to have a condition when this goes forward and is fruitful that is not going to have fractions?
We will, and in addition, staff has a suggestion that we could say based on 1 parking space per instructor and 1 parking space per 3 students, the number of students and instructors on site at any given time must comply with those numbers or something to that effect, just so that there's at least an equation of what the numbers would be in terms of number of instructors and staff. Or we could simply say, as Councilmember Jensen did, comply with town code and the alternate parking arrangement between the parties. Period.
So
as the maker of the motion, I would prefer the second alternative that Ms. Pravetti just proposed.
Mr.
Comply
Rennie?
with town code.
Mr. Rennie?
Yes, that's fine.
All right, we now have a motion. Further discussion? Seeing none. Oh, Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I will be supporting the motion. I appreciate all the efforts of my fellow council members up here in reference to the parking. My analysis was much simpler. I asked my 14-year-old daughter what she thought of this Cucina Bambina, and she said, "Dad, that place is awesome." So therefore, I will be supporting the motion because I like awesome businesses in Los Gatos. Thank you.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Go start your awesome business. All right, we're now on agenda item 10, which brings back the operating and capital budgets for fiscal year 16-17. Staff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Before you tonight is a response to the direction that the council provided to us at our last meeting. You will see in the staff report as well as in the addenda and desk items responses to the desire to add back in the community services officer. We've been able to accommodate that, as well as identify dollars for the additional changes, such as additional funds for the footbridge, a placeholder for the green bike lanes, as well as other items noted in the staff report. Clearly, there are trade-offs because I know there may be other items. We were unable to find funding for the street lamps, I'm sorry to say, and I recognize that you may wish to allocate or redistribute the capital funds accordingly. So staff is here. We have staff from Finance, Parks and Public Works, as well as our other departments who are available to answer your questions. We did our best in terms of a recommendation, but we're also flexible. So if there is a redistribution, we're happy to accommodate that. And with that, we are recommending that council give us clear directions so that way we can then prepare the final adopted budget, assuming the resolution is passed this evening. Thank you.
And before we go to questions from the other council members, my question would be, would staff anticipate that the council go through each of these sections, for example, green bike lanes or bridge art and vote them up or down? Is that how you would anticipate we would approach this?
That is one approach, and that might be the cleanest way. Alternatively, if there's another priority that is different than the ones identified in the memo, council could choose that perhaps you want to take footbridge first and then green bike lanes, et cetera. So we did our best to capture the priority based on the spirit of the discussion at the last meeting, and I think it might be helpful. That way we can all follow along in the staff report.
All right, so right now we're going to go to questions of staff. Ms. Jensen, I thought I saw your hand up.
My question is, although the staff report indicates, and I just heard that the resolution contains the various and reflects the various things that we discussed, I can't find those things in the resolution. So, for example, where am I seeing green bike lanes in the resolution? I don't see it.
Yeah, we typically don't get to that level of detail in the resolution. Instead, we have a general statement that acknowledges the discussion and actions that council will be taking this evening.
So we're going to see something else.
You will see if this resolution is adopted, the next step will be us preparing the final adopted budget, which is typically published, I believe, in the summer.
Okay, thank you.
Let me follow up with that. So if let's say we just adopted all of these items and in the amounts that staff has suggested, the resolution doesn't reflect those items or those numbers. When would the council become aware of what happened? Would we become aware of it when the actual CIP comes back to us in 2 weeks?
We would not be bringing back the budget. So there is a phrase in the draft resolution attachment 1, whereas on June 7th, 2016, Town Council considered and reviewed the revised proposed budget and capital improvement plan, making final determinations. So your discussion tonight will be those final determinations. What we would like to do is walk through with you what they are, and I think the good news is that we've been able to go through safety versus non-safety to find dollars to fund most of the items to some degree so that they are meaningful projects. We would also have it documented in the minutes that would be coming back to you on June 21st, so that way you would also have an itemized list of all the actions taken this evening.
Thank you. Other questions? Seeing none, let's see, this is agenda item 10, and I do have a card. Tony Alarcon.
Tony Alarcon, 229 Johnson Avenue. Mayor and council members, I wanted to speak on the budget tonight and clarify a couple things. I had addressed and notified the Parks and Rec well over a year ago that what I consider the biggest safety risk in our town is the unlit bridge that we're looking at restoring the painting on it. I had an office in Old Town underneath the underhang directly from the bridge. I know that there's a homeless encampment down there, and at night my wife and her friends tend to use that as a shortcut to walk through. I would implore all of you to go there at night and see if you feel comfortable walking across that bridge. That is the biggest hazard and risk for a female in our town or a person to be robbed or accosted. That is a safety issue that needs to be addressed, and is not addressed in this budget. And to defer this even further, again, I notified the town well over a year ago. It does look like there's electrical. Today, we can put solar on it. We can look at a lot of different options. People, when they're downtown, do walk across a bridge at 2:30 in the morning. And so most solar would cover that if we don't want to run electrical wiring. I think that's a much bigger priority than the painting and the $35,000 that we're looking at putting non-graffiti panels on it. And so I also want to point out that staff has suggested that you might partner with schools, and I don't really think that's the case. I just received this from the superintendent, Diana Body, that notifies us that the fact remains that the $2.8 million our parcel tax generate annually is not sufficient to support the same level of academic programming it could 10 years ago. The Los Gatos Union Elementary School Board trustees intends to put a measure on the 2016 ballot for a local funding measure. So I don't think we can count on the schools. We've already seen, in my opinion, what the lack of forward planning is impacting our schools and not charging right fees and even student generation rates. The other thing that I noticed in the budget is that there's no allocation of the police pension review. I support local police department, and I think if we do not address that and do an analysis, we may jeopardize losing our local police. And I'm not in favor of having the sheriff come into town to save money, but I think we need to evaluate the cost, what we're charging Monte Sereno, and the pension. So please do consider allocating funds to do an independent audit and suggestion.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none, I have no other excuse me. I have no other cards on this agenda item, and I see no one coming forward, so I will close the public testimony portion of this hearing and turn to council. But before we do that, this issue of lighting the bridge and completing the artwork, as I've said in the past, but both these issues are of importance to me personally, and it isn't just people walking across the bridge at 2:30 in the early morning. There are issues on that bridge, and I do consider them safety issues. So I know that the staff report provides and suggested funding for the artwork, and the staff report also says that there's no money or available for the lighting. If staff could please refresh my memory as to what the cost and issues are with regard to that lighting.
So as mentioned on page 5 of your staff report, although there may be evidence that former lighting exists, there's currently no power on the bridge. So we would need to do significantly more work before we could come up with a cost estimate of what it would take to do the lighting of the bridge. We're happy to do that and come back to you in the September timeframe with a cost estimate. We might be in a better position to also be looking at our revenues and our status of the budget. And if there are some additional funds available, we might be able to do an analysis of what that would cost and bring forward some different options for you. But within the few weeks that we had from our last meeting, we were not able to complete all that analysis because we would likely need to have a consultant help us do that assessment of the electrical and then come up with the options. But we're happy to come back in September with those cost estimates and then identify available funding at that time in order to move that forward. We recognize that. I know that our police department has done some work regarding the homeless encampment, so that is an issue that we are addressing from a public safety standpoint.
And just to be clear, my personal concern is not the homeless encampment, but just generally the lighting there. The speaker referenced solar as opposed to other lighting. Do you know whether or not that will entail the use of the need for electrical boxes? Or do you know that yet?
I would defer to our town engineer for that particular question. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Lisa Peterson, Town Engineer. Ultimately, we would need to get a consultant to review the area of the bridge to see what kind of lighting we can get there. In some cases, you can put solar lighting. It really depends on what type of light you have available, and if you have a lot of trees around the area, it could be something that's just not going to be possible, and it could end up being maybe a combination of, you could do an area of solar, but maybe not the whole thing. So it's really something that we would have to look at much more comprehensively.
And what information, if any, do you have with regard to the kind of electrical boxes that are necessary for what I will call simply regular lighting as opposed to the string lighting that's on the Main Street Bridge?
So again, that would have to be something we would have to look into. I don't have that information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Mr. Rennie.
I'd like to make a comment, maybe a suggestion. The Los Gatos Morning Rotary has a program called Lighting for Literacy, where they build solar units that are installed in places like Mexico and Africa and the Navajo Nation that are off-grid. They are built at Fisher and Hillbrook and other places nearby, and then they're shipped to donate. We might explore having the Morning Rotary donate some of those as a stopgap. The only problem I see is they have a switch on them rather than an automatic one, but possibly that could be a donation we could explore.
Thank you. Further questions? Ms. Sayak.
This is a somewhat general question, but somewhat tied to this. So I understand the need for a consultant to look into this issue. Would engaging with the consultant have to wait until this budget's actually approved, or if we decide this is a priority as has been identified in the past, can that actually occur before July 1st? Hiring a consultant to begin that investigation and that work.
We should have some operating money available to get started on that. Again, it's going to take somebody some amount of time, so we would probably need to come back to you with the full cost estimate. But if this is a priority, then we would get started right away.
Okay. And then if I may, Madam Mayor, so understanding the concern for safety, are there other options that lighting definitely is one of it, and I'm looking at Chief Frisbee. Are there opportunities to just make sure that that's a concern that our community has raised and do perhaps increased patrolling in that area so that we know it's a concern, we know that we're addressing it, but are there things that we can do in the immediate without having to wait until we have a September budget that gives us more permanent lighting?
Thank you. And I think that we have concerns about not picking you up, Chief, on the microphone. Just so for future reference, I'm going to suggest that the staff make the mobile microphones available to whomever is speaking. And I hate to do this, but just briefly summarize what you just told us.
Sure. As mentioned earlier, there are plenty of ways that we can try to deal with the safety issues at the bridge. As I said earlier, we have, over the years, just most recently, moved some of the encampments along and out of the way. In addition to those issues that we have with transients and or encampments, we also do have kids and other people who congregate and have been there for many, many years. So we can incorporate that into our work plans. It happens mostly, as has been explained, after hours, and that's definitely one that we can address prior to any construction or decisions that council has made.
Thank you. Other questions? All right, let's see if I have any cards on this. I don't think I do, but let me look. I do not. I don't have any cards on agenda item 10. Does anyone in the audience wish to address us? Seeing no one coming forward, I will close the public testimony portion of this hearing and return to council for a I have a feeling it'll be motions, but I want to ask staff. I see the staff report up to, let's say, through page 2, giving suggestions as to available funds. And then I see us moving through the footbridge and the green bike lanes. And the poles. Am I missing something?
I would just point out that on page 2, there is an operating budget item, and if you do wish to parse out this as separate motions, perhaps we can, the council would consider a motion just to add back in the CSO, and that would close out the operating budget modification, and then we can move into the discussion of the capital program.
All right, I'm looking for a motion on the operating budget. Ms. Jensen?
I move that we add back in the Community Service Officer pilot program for nighttime nuisances as contained on page 2 of our staff report.
I'll second. Is that a complete enough motion for you?
That's great. Thank you.
All right, further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Now, if I understand staff correctly, we can take it on a item by item?
Yes, and the footbridge discussion begins on page 4, and staff's available for any additional questions.
And let me ask you, before we get to page 4, on page 3, staff has its, what I call it? Staff has its analysis of available funding. Should we just move past that and get to the actual capital improvement items?
Staff's available for questions, so if you don't agree with the analysis, we did our best assessment, but if you believe there may be other things in the first 5 priority that might be up for consideration, we're open to that as well. But again, we were looking at not just safety, but also long-term benefits and financial savings to the town as we identified projects 1 through 5 as priority.
Ms. Jensen.
I guess this is a question for the mayor and Ms. Ravetti. Did you want a motion with respect to the priorities that are identified on page 3?
No, we don't need a motion. It just identifies how we were able to find additional funds to fund the other priorities.
Okay, thank you.
I wasn't looking for a motion necessarily either. I will note that I personally agreed with the items that totaled $485,000, which were 6 through 10. I might, if need be, I might consider the last three items on the top tier, which total $75,000, but that's just there as a thought, not as a motion. Mr. Rennie.
I'll just comment on that. Thank you, Mayor Spector. I'm not really in favor of removing the energy efficiencies from the priority list. It seems to me that those are, they pay back, and energy efficiency is important. That's a direction that the town should be moving for sustainability reasons and for saving money in the future. So I kind of think it's short-sighted to remove those. So I'd prefer to not remove those from the priority list.
Okay, any other discussion on that page? All right, then we're going to go forward, trying this piecemeal approach. This is the Forbes Mill Footbridge Revitalization Project. Ms. Sayak.
Okay, so I think we've covered the safety aspect of the lighting. With this, I appreciate staff's efforts to look at various ways to get this project moving forward. I do want to caution us about moving away from our partnership with Los Gatos Recreation and moving more with the schools. And the reason why I like it with Los Gatos Recreation is anybody who lives in Los Gatos or in proximity to Los Gatos can sign up through the summer and participate. My concern is if you start working with specific schools, we start excluding segments of our population that don't belong to those schools. And that always is an area of concern for me, and so I would caution us against with that. Also, as a speaker had said, funding just in general with the schools is rather limited. I know they're having difficulty with their own budgetary issues. And so I would really prefer that we just keep our partnership with Los Gatos Recreation. I think it's a project that many people look forward to over the summer. I like that every year there's a fresh crop of students that are putting their art on the wall. And I think it's a great program. There are obviously ways to increase the numbers, but I don't think we should just do a mad rush to get it all funded and change the model that has been working successfully.
Further discussion, motion, Ms. Jensen.
I'd like to make a motion. Looking at page 5 of the staff report, and it's the second paragraph under the heading discussion, which indicates the staff recommendation. And my motion is to adopt that, which is that we dedicate the town beautification project balance of $10,160 plus an additional $25,907 from the reallocation of a portion of non-safety project funding to have a total of $36,067 for funding of the bridge. I viewed the discussion regarding schools and recreation department as informational. My motion does not specifically does not contain any kind of recommendation with respect to how that should work going forward. I assume we'll do the best we can. And my motion also includes a request that staff start doing any kind of work or research with a consultant, without a consultant, whatever it might be, to determine what kind of lighting can be put on that footbridge and what cost that would be before July 1st.
All right, I'm going to second that motion. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. All right, what's my next one? Green bike lanes. This is also page 5. Ms. Jensen.
Just going to jump in there if it's okay. I would like to make a motion that we approve what's contained under the green bike lanes. I'm quite a fan of this one. I think we have a $75,000, $958 placeholder for green bike lanes. I am very excited and would like the council to endorse, hopefully, the improved multimodal corridor along Main Street in frontage of the high school that will increase bicycle and pedestrian safety, increase drop-off areas, and decrease high school issued permit parking on town streets. And I would like to specifically include those wish lists and that project as part of my motion.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Then also on that page, maintain or improve the pavement condition index PCI. We've got various components, which takes this one up to $1 million. Discussion, motion. Ms. Sayat.
Unfortunately, I have more questions rather than a motion. So one very discrete question is, with the Albright money that was identified, this 241, if we were to use it for PCI funds, would it be for streets that are adjacent or in the vicinity of the Albright development, or would it fall into just the general lump of PCI improvements?
Thank you, Lisa Peterson, town engineer. It would just fall into the general improvements.
Let me clarify, actually. In talking with Director Morley, as stated in the middle of page 6 of the staff report, we have identified some streets in the northerly part of the town. So while not immediately adjacent to Albright, it's at least within the general vicinity in the northerly part of town. So it's not like we would be taking that money and putting it on the east portion of the community.
Ms. Sayak?
Okay. And then just in general, with the PCIs, and the impetus behind this was at the last meeting, it was shared with us that we needed $1 million to maintain the PCI of 67. We've gotten some information through public comment about just how the confusion over PCIs. Now, what is still unclear to me, and I apologize because I ask this every single time, we have the PCI that fluctuates. When does that average, how often does that average actually get reevaluated? When the improvements from last year were done and those streets improved, does that help improve our overall PCI? I'm just concerned how all of a sudden we jumped from a 70 and now we're to 67, and how much assurance will I have that another million will actually keep us at 67?
So the way that it works with the pavement condition index is we have a consultant that goes out and reviews all of the town streets every 4 years and the arterial and collector streets every 2 years. So at those points, the consultant will put that information into the StreetSaver database, and then we're able, to see what the PCIs are at that time with that new evaluation. However, additionally, as we go through and we do maintenance of streets, we do input that into the StreetSaver program as well.
And so when we're looking at our overall averages, it's based on the StreetSaver? Is it based on StreetSaver plus town input through all the maintenance work that's done over the years?
So it's based on the evaluation that is input by the consultant plus the input values that are placed by staff for additional maintenance that has been done.
And so and I have many more of these questions. So somewhere there's a list of every street in town with its PCI rating, and it's continually updated so that each street we could look up a single street and we can monitor whether it's improving or not, or deteriorating based on the conditions.
Correct.
Okay. Those are my questions.
Other questions? All right, so we will return back to the PCI funding component of staff's recommendation. And I'll just say for discussion, I don't have a motion. This fluctuation, my perception of the fluctuation in PCI is a question for me too. I mean, it seems like 1 year it's 70 and then all of a sudden it's 67. And I don't know how we're getting from A to B either. Obviously, I'm going to have to get much more educated and pay a lot more attention.
And Madam Mayor, I would just offer, because this has been a question that's come up several times from the council, I think what we would like to do is an informational memorandum that describes a little bit more about the methodology, how the PCI is calculated, where on the website we make that data available, so that way as we are making these investments, you can track and see how this occurs. So that'll be work that staff can do offline. We wouldn't need an action item before the council, but we're happy to provide additional information on the methodology.
Thank you. All right, now we don't need a motion. We can skip over this one and go to the next one. All right. Or is there a next one? So no motion on the PCI. Staff input on that, if any?
Just wondering if the council is interested in making the additional investment, since we did find the available dollars to maintain the PCI. If not, that might be dollars that you could invest in other items.
Ms. Jensen.
I've heard that we don't need a motion, but then I was listening to Ms. Prevetti and I thought, well, maybe it would be appropriate. So I'll just turn it into a comment, which would be, I think it was one of the things that I had wanted in the budget discussion was to get our PCI up to a 70 so that we could potentially take advantage of any funds that we would get from the VTA transportation measure if it should pass, that we could use just in our own town discretion. So that was my motivation in doing that. I'm interested in the suggestion that we would get presented information on how the PCI works. I think it would not only be helpful to the council, but also to members of the public who try to follow this and figure out how our streets are getting maintained and before, I think, at least for me, I would want to make a commitment to the funding levels here. Although I support them in principle, I would love to see an explanation of how that is done, how we can evaluate it, where the money is going to go, and how we can see whether it's been effective. So that was my comment.
And following up on that, I agree. The suggestion here is $1 million to increase the PCI, and I'm not comfortable that I know enough to spend that much money and not know exactly what that money is going to do. In looking at this list, 3 of the 4 line items are already they're already in other boxes of or line items of money. The only one that's new is the $383,000, which is a reallocation. So that would mean that 383 would just go back into the budget as it was previously allocated, correct?
The reallocation of the projects would go back if this is not approved. I do want to point out that the $350,000, that's the line item just above, is the new contract that was approved under the consent calendar with the lease of of the conduit. So we have an immediate or potential immediate use for those extra dollars. And then, staff did find some additional dollars. And if we do not expend it for this purpose, then it would go back into their respective pots of money for future distribution.
Well, before we go into talk about the respective pots of money, are we talking about reserved or allocated funds, or will they just go into the general fund to be spent on a day-to-day basis?
So the Albright money, based on prior conversation, is already in a separate account. So if it's not allocated for this purpose, we would retain it in a separate account, and we would assume the council would want to consider these extra dollars together with the community benefit monies that must be spent in the immediate area. So we would hold on to that, so you would have a more complete package of money. The utility permit maintenance fee, that's general fund, so that could be allocated to other general expenditures. The conduit use is new money, so that would just be general fund. And then if we don't reallocate those projects, then we could reinstate those projects, or alternatively, council could say, let's just put that money towards another priority. Yeah, and the director of finance may wish to comment further.
Just to be clear, that the reallocation, as it's stated in your staff report on page, I can't see my page 6, we show a balance of $383,000. That's in the GFAR fund, so if it wasn't used for PCI purposes, it would remain in GFAR and could be reallocated or stay with the initially proposed projects. So it would not go to the general fund. It's available just for the project work.
Thank you. And before I recognize Mr. Rennie, I don't have a motion, but just generally, I would like these funds at this point not to just be put back into the general fund. Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So what I see, the 383 would go back into some combination of Bachman Park, Civic Center HVAC upgrades, Civic Center fountain modification, and Plaza Park improvements. That's more than the 383. So what I think I hear you saying is you would just put it back and you'd start spending it on these projects. Is that correct?
Yes, except for the dollars that we already allocated to the footbridge.
Mr. Leonardis?
Thank you, Mayor Spector. While we have Ms. Peterson up here, assuming that someday all the Almond Grove streets are completed, how much would that raise our PCI index by?
I would have to check and put that in the program. However, because they are all residential streets, they tend to have lower value in the program, so ultimately it may not have a huge impact.
Thank you.
Mr. Leonardis.
I like the fact that all this money has been gathered in one place in the form of $1 million, and I think it would be nice to consider allocating this towards the Almond Grove Street project in the future. I'm not certain of the existing amount we have in there now. I think it's somewhere around $14 million. I'm not sure what the future bids will come in at and what savings we will achieve between now and those future bids. But I like the fact that these funds have all been gathered in one bucket. And I think it would be good to consider setting those aside for the future use towards the Almond Grove.
Ms. Sayak.
A couple of thoughts. As a side note, I think what would be helpful, I appreciate the informational memo that will come to us on PCIs. I think this is an area where we continue to be rather confused. And so anytime you can provide more information, I think that would be quite valuable. I think what would also be valuable as we move forward is as these streets are improved, as we start to look at, I'd like to know after the fact what they were with the improvements, what the average, what it became. And so we can actually see for ourselves the actual benefit that spending all this money has to our streets. With the Albright, the 241, I would like to see what streets are actually going to be improved with that money. I know those, the Albright project was fairly controversial, and so I'd like to be able to show that there was a nexus between the money received with what streets are adjacent to that development. I think I want to be sensitive that the improvements are actually close to the actual project. With the new money, the $25,000 and the $350,000, I would actually be comfortable putting that forward with the PCI improvements for the following year. I think last time we had this discussion, I was one that wanted to move more money into that because the idea, the concept of putting money into it now that can help us later with future improvements, I still believe that is a beneficial way to spend our money. But again, I think we need more information on what it is we're spending our money on, rather than just this general notion that we're doing a PCI improvement.
Mr. Rennie?
Was that a motion?
Sure, I'll make it into a motion. So I move that for now, the $350,000 as well as the $25,000, the new money that has been identified, that we allocate that for PCI improvements, with an understanding that more information will be coming forward on how the PCI street improvements will be, how that's selected and how you make those financial assessments. With the reallocation of 383, I would like to hold this until we get more information. And the 241, I would like to actually see what streets will be improved with that money so that I have more comfort that it's actually adjacent to the Albright development.
We have a motion. Mr. Rennie?
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I'll second the motion because the way that street maintenance go, once it gets to a certain point, it gets exponentially more costly to repair it. So if we spend the money now, it's going to be less costly than in the future. So it's important to do it ahead of time. I went out with Director Morley today, and he was showing me on the street, and it was clear to me where they had small cracks forming that if they put a cape seal on it now, it was not going to be very expensive. He showed me the portions where the cracks had gotten bigger, and now they actually have to go in, dig it out. They come with a saw, they cut it out, refill it, a lot more expensive. So you want to catch those cracks before they come to the point they have to be dug out, for example. So I think it's important to get the money in early, especially since we're really dropping down into this point where our streets are starting to become exponentially worse. Thank you.
All right, further discussion? I'm going to support the motion, but I just want a clarification. I don't support taking the two line items that are not included in the motion. I understand that Albright, we are going to wait and see if those monies are used generally in the Albright North part of town. And to the maker of the motion, what, if anything, does your motion include with regard to the $383,000 GFAR monies? Are you saying they go back to where they were before?
I was holding. My intent was to hold that until we had more information.
All right. With that, I will support the motion. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Passes unanimously. Since staff didn't come up with monies for the streetlight poles, I don't see anything else. Ms. Pravetti?
I think you've completed your work.
Ms. Jensen?
Do we need a motion to adopt the resolution?
Yes, I think that would be prudent to do overall. That would summarize all of the actions taken this evening.
I move that we adopt the resolution that's contained in Attachment 1 of our staff report.
I'll second with the editor that the motion, that the resolution by implication will encompass the motions that we have made today.
That is my intent.
Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, staff and council. Agenda item 11. Provide direction to address private corporate buses in town. Before I turn this over to staff for the staff report, I just wanted to provide a little more information to the council. I, as mayor, put this item on the agenda, and I put it on with the following background. I was contacted by both the business owners at the Vasona Station development and also on Capri at approximately the same time a few months ago, raising issues with regard to the parking of Google employees, first in the business Vasona Station and then on Capri. Vasona Station, the manager there was able to get the employees to move, and so then the issue was with the Capri residents. Ms. Pravetti and I met with a representative of Capri. Ms. Pravetti and I called, who expressed his concern. Ms. Pravetti and I then called the traffic, and he may be here, I don't know, the traffic person for Google, who didn't have any suggestions but asked if Ms. Pravetti or staff could find a private parking lot. Ms. Pravetti, anything else that leads up to this meeting?
No, it's a good summary. Thank you.
All right, do we have questions of staff? Seeing none, this is agenda item 11. I do not have any cards. I see a card walking down the aisle. And I may not have read it. This is provide direction to address private corporate buses in town. Ms. Risto.
Hi, Maria Risto, 85 Broadway. I'm really glad that you put this on the agenda. It's been a discussion on and off in transportation and parking, and I've been contacted by people who work at Google because one of the issues we have is we encourage people to carpool or take a bus, or in the case of Hillbrook, we've asked them to reduce their traffic, and so they've responded with buses. And what happens is there's not an official way through the town to set up where buses can be and where people who are dropping off can drop off or park. And so I think it's really incumbent upon our town to partner with any kind of group that's putting a bus together on a regular basis. One of the side effects of Google being moved around, that bus will be at some location and then maybe something gets developed, then it moves somewhere else. And it was in a church for a while on Shannon. And I spoke to several people that used to walk or bike there. That was a great location for them. They had a lot of people riding it. It got moved because of some residents' concerns. And as that bus moved, ultimately, many of the people who rode that bus ended up catching it in Saratoga. So big picture for the valley, yay, we got a lot of cars off the freeway. Small picture for Los Gatos, we had every one of those people who would have ridden the bus and gotten on in Los Gatos driving through Los Gatos to Saratoga. So with a concept that we would address a good location that would be near residences, because if it's at the end of town and people still have to drive through Los Gatos to get to the bus, we've done the greater good of getting people onto buses and out of their single occupancy vehicles, but we haven't done a step of alleviating traffic in town. So I hope you'll take that into consideration. I hope this can expand to the point that we offer assistance to Hillbrook or any other school that's going to have buses. And how do we work with the residents? How do we work with a way for a safe drop-off? How do we accommodate everybody's needs to get people out of their cars? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure I have questions too. We'll start with Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Ms. Risto, in our report, and maybe this is better for staff, but I'll start with you, it says there's 333 Google employees with Los Gatos addresses, and it says Google reports 146 of those riding the bus, which is more than half. Is that before or after those that are now going to Saratoga, or does that include those?
That's a good question. I can't answer that. Google could. If they're riding a bus, there are multiple stops that may include the people who are driving over to Saratoga right now.
Okay, thank you.
And as a rejoinder to that, part of the reason they were going to Saratoga is because the bus in Los Gatos then became such an inconvenient location that very few people would load there, and it would have to make multiple stops, and it took longer to get on the bus in Los Gatos and get to work than it did to drive to Saratoga and take that bus. So we don't want to make it that inconvenient.
Other questions? Ms. Sayak.
Okay, so you're also on Safe Routes to School, correct?
Correct.
So I want to use Hillbrook as an example. So with their Safe Routes to School program, are they able to identify what locations are most convenient for them to pick up students to take them to Hillbrook? How do they create where their bus stops are? Do you happen to know?
That's a good question. I know that they've tried to work with Safe Routes to School. I do know originally they had a partnership. I'm mixing up the wrong churches. Because Hillbrook is part of Safe Routes to School, they do work together. But the problem is, you get a few people in a room that agree, and then you've got a larger spin out of people whose perception is that having a bus parked is unsafe, whereas I would contend that 45 cars is less safe. I think if it has the stamp of the town, if the town works together, because a lot of this is town property or coordinates, then you say, okay, this is what we've chosen, this is a good spot, this looks like one of the safest places, there will be less pushback and less drift of the thing moves every 6 months.
Certainly, go ahead.
And the second question I have for you is, based on your regional efforts, do you know what other cities are doing to help address this issue? My understanding is it's the parking that concerns most of the residents, because whatever location you set as your drop-off, and if it is close to residential neighborhoods, all those parkers are now parking in front of residential homes. My understanding, based on the feedback that I've got, that's the biggest issue that I've heard as a concern. With your regional work, what is it that other cities are doing to help address this?
I will have to look into that. One of the problems is the further you put it, the more people do drive there. When it was on Shannon, according to two of the people that rode the bus, more than half the people could walk or bike there. And when they bike there, they load their bikes into the bus. And sometimes they'd ride all the way home, but they didn't have to deal with bike parking. You can't load your car onto the bus. So I think that's where the location of the pickup place becomes critical, where you want it in a place where people feel comfortable walking and biking.
Further questions? Now, did you actually come to a conclusion somewhere around along there as with regard to a recommendation to us?
One of my recommendations is, I did talk to Director Morley a couple months ago and ask if we could agendize it in transportation and parking, but realized we're only advisory, so I'm glad it's coming at this level, is that I do think the town should have an official corporate bus lot. And so some of the things you're addressing would fix that. We do need to then make sure there's enough parking there where people can park, not on streets. So I think someplace like near Netflix, I think that makes the best sense, that the town has an official place.
And whether or not that's realistic in the near term or not, the next question would be, if we're using public sites, would it be your recommendation that the corporation using that site compensates the town, or the town takes the expense?
If it's in a town-owned site, I think there should be some sharing of responsibility there. I think the town benefits from getting the cars off the road, and my understanding from reading the staff reports is that it looks like there would be some cooperation if there were negotiations with these corporations. And I think that's a reasonable ask because they benefit too.
All right. Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Ms. Risto, so last week the VTA board approved the recommendation to go ahead and purchase the light rail station right away, and then Los Gatos has been requesting that they then turn that into a park and ride for these buses while we wait for the station, which could be forever, basically. So my question is, does this sound like a magic bullet that if we can move them all out there, or is it going to be, are we going to have this, it's too difficult to drive there problem?
I don't know. I mean, at that point, what's nice about it is it's, a great location. The bus can get right onto the freeway, and so it'll be a quick turnaround for the bus. The downside is everybody who goes there has to get through town. So now you're going through the intersection by Albright and Lark Avenue, however people get there. So I don't know how those employees will get there if we can convince them to bike. And I know there's a good hearty bunch at Google. It would be interesting to find out from Google if they can poll their employees and find out if they had a permanent location they can count on, would they bike there? Because if every one of them drives there, it's still a good thing, but we have done nothing to reduce traffic in town, which is one of our problems.
Further questions? Thank you. I have no other cards. Does anyone want to address us on this item? See no one coming forward, I will close the public testimony portion of this hearing and look to council for discussion, question, motions. Ms. Jensen.
Just a procedural question. Is it actually the intent, since we're providing direction, to have a motion, or is it to make comments with respect to the suggestions that are in the staff report?
We're certainly interested in any comments that you have. It would be helpful for us if we know which direction you would like us to pursue, and in particular, because we have not yet discussed a compensation element, if there's specific interest in that, it may be useful to put some of those elements into a motion so it's clear to all parties that, in fact, the majority of the council does want us to pursue that type of option.
Ms. Jensen?
So I'm not prepared yet to make a motion, but I will make comments that maybe will get incorporated in an ultimate motion, maybe not. So I'll start out by saying a very simple thing. Busing people is a very good thing. So to the extent that we are going to work together with people to use buses, be they for our schools, be they for a shuttle service in the town, be they for employers, whoever they may be, who would like to shuttle from the smallest employer on North Santa Cruz to the biggest employer in Mountain View, any bus, as far as I'm concerned, is a good bus. So I echo Ms. Ristow's comments that we should be working with those corporations who are foresighted enough to provide buses for their employees and get people off the streets and provide them those opportunities with places where they can do that in the town of Los Gatos. So with respect to the suggestions that are in the staff report for my purposes, I think that using the parking lot behind the Starbucks on the north side of Santa Cruz Avenue and Highway 9 and is a fabulous place to be able to use a parking. It's very underused parking. It's town-owned, and I think it would be a good place to use. I don't think it's a particularly good spot on the corner of Winchester and Lark. I think it's too small. It already is impacted by lots of traffic, so adding something there I don't think is a particularly good idea. I also, as Mr. Rennie, heard that the VTA is prepared, if the tax measure passes in November, to purchase the Santa Clara Valley Water District land that's associated with the Sona Light Rail stop and convert that to a park and ride, and I think that would be great. I realize that what I'm about to say is sort of out there, but it's private property and it gets used for that now, and what's been proposed has been turned down. But the corner of Shannon and Los Gatos Boulevard would be an awesome park and ride. It's used like that already. So I don't know what the town can do to talk to that property owner to see if perhaps that's a good use. So my final comment is I agree with the staff that it is not a wise solution. It is not a solution at all to put red curb, no parking signs, preferential parking, or limited parking on public streets. The fact is that they are public streets. And the people that want to limit parking on their street probably go to another street and park there. So you can't shift a burden on a public street. It's a public street. So I appreciate that they have some difficulty, but as long as it's a public street, then it can be used by the public. So it's incumbent on the town to partner with those corporate entities and figure out solutions that do work so that we can get busing implemented in the town. Those are my comments.
Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I'll say that I pretty much agree with all Ms. Jensen's comments. Maybe Winchester and Lark is okay. I'm not going to completely rule that out, but I'm okay ruling that out. All the others I completely agree with. I will say just a small correction that the purchase of the land is actually part of the Measure A from 2000, which they're continuing to collect. So they would purchase with that, but I don't think they can use that money to build a parking lot. So that money might have to come from the November sales tax measure or some other place. Thanks.
Ms. Sayak.
Okay, thank you. Overall, I'm in agreement with all that's already been said, but I do want to speak to the funding, since that was something that town manager has specifically asked us. I think in general, we should be encouraging more shared parking, whether it's with business to business or whether it's business with town property. I think there's a beneficial, there's benefits on both sides, and I think that I would look to staff to figure out what is the right amount that encourages the shared parking, but still somehow enables the town to make it a sustainable project for ourselves. So, I think all of the areas identified, I agree with. And I think in general, with regard to the red curb, the no parking signs, all of that, whether it's high school traffic or whether it's this private the corporate parking that we're looking at, I think the town manager has mentioned that we need to look at this holistically. And at a future meeting, I hope that we will be able to do it, whether it's with high school or whether it's corporate, look at the town radiuses and look at where does it make sense to put permit parking. We can't just shift the burden from one street to another, as has already been said. And we need to look at concerted ways to really reduce the number of cars on our streets, and what are the immediate steps we can do to get to that long-term goal.
Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. When I thought of this, I thought of it, how do we bring the least amount of aggravation to our residents, excluding, obviously, the ideology that busing is a great idea and it keeps cars off the road. And I thought, we have all these bus stops throughout town. Why do we need park and ride locations when the Google buses or the Apple buses could just park at the VTA bus stops and pick up people in their own neighborhoods? So I'm not all that certain that we need to have people commute to a location, get on a special bus, and then go from that location if it's going to be a detriment to neighborhoods. I don't know why they would not be able to partner with VTA to use their stops and let the people walk from their houses or ride their bikes from their houses to get to those VTA stops, primarily along Los Gatos Boulevard or Winchester Boulevard or the the main thoroughfares throughout town. It seems like a very common sense thing to me. So my feedback to these entities would be to utilize the VTA stops, and perhaps in exchange for using the VTA stops, maybe they can put the little Google advertisement or the Apple advertisement on the little bus stop thing, wherever those advertisement spots are.
Yes, you may. Go ahead.
Actually, I'd like to just echo that I like that idea. And also, Maria Risto had spoken about her commission, the commission that she's on, as this is something that they'd like to look at. This is not something that we can immediately solved tonight. And I think more eyes that are looking at this that can provide more suggestions, I think would be a beneficial thing. So I would encourage, whether it's the Traffic and Parking Commission or the Bicycle and Pedestrian Commission or the Safe Routes to School, to look at this and know that this is an area that we've decided is a priority, and provide suggestions along the way to town staff to help get us to achieve the goals that we've stated tonight.
All right, I don't see any other hands. Let me go through what I've heard. I also like the idea of the private buses using the VTA stops to pick up the employees so that we can eliminate the use of the employees' cars, and we can also therefore eliminate or minimize the parking in our residential neighborhoods. I am supportive of the use of town lots. I would consider compensation for those uses. It's not mandatory, but it is something I would be open to. I would also have staff monitoring how, if those lots get full. If we're talking about the lot north of Highway 9, I don't anticipate that would be an issue in the near future. I would not be opposed necessarily to the private corporation use of our property on Winchester. Again, I would look to the private user to compensate to some extent, whatever would be needed to prepare or maintain that lot. I would, and this may or may not made its way into the staff report, I had heard, I was invited, Los Gatos was invited to use the Campbell lot, or to suggest to Google and Apple that Campbell has additional space there. So to have us explore that. And that's all I have. Now, before I look to see if there's any other council person who wishes to weigh in on this, let me ask Ms. Pravetti, do you need more input? Have you been counting votes or whatever it is you're doing?
I think we've got great direction from the council. We heard a lot of consensus points. We appreciate Ms. Risto, who spoke, and the opportunity to continue to partner with our own commissions as well as with the council. I think what we'll do is explore some of the compensation options. That would obviously need to be something that we would bring back to you, but I think we've got great direction, and the clarity with respect to some of the other options now being off the table is also instructive. So I think we have enough to move forward.
Thank you. And when you were talking, I also don't want us to begin putting our no parking signs in our neighborhoods and therefore moving the problem. On the other hand, I think it's an issue that we need to address because it keeps coming up. So I would like the issue generally brought back to the council.
Yes, and we're happy to work with you on scheduling that item.
Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. One other thought I had, and I avoided saying this the first time around because there is a lot of traffic collecting in that part of town already. But the Netflix campus, the new one, has a bus area in the back, and I don't know if they would be interested in partnering with Apple and Google and perhaps carving off a part of their back parking lot if they have excess capacity to accommodate bus trips from other corporations. It's all set up and ready to do that already. It's nicely done.
Well, I agree with that. That's a good idea.
Yeah, we would just need to, since they are still expanding and under construction, I think we'd want to make sure that they can accommodate their own employees, but that might be a longer-term solution and partnership.
Further discussion. Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you to Ms. Pravetti's comments, and I'm, personally have witnessed quite a bit of what appears to be extra parking. Now, I realize there are 2 buildings still under construction, but at the current time, it appears that there is a lot of parking available for what it's worth.
Further discussion? Hearing none. Anything else, Ms. Pravetti?
No, thank you very much, Council.
Thank you. We're moving on from that agenda item. Yes. All right, moving on to agenda item 12, approve a pilot closure of a portion of South Santa Cruz Avenue to address cut-through traffic.
Good evening, Mayor and Council Member. Lisa Peterson, Town Engineer. We are requesting approval to put forward a pilot closure of Santa Cruz Avenue at Highway 17 by Wood Road. The summer cut-through traffic has returned to the town of Los Gatos. We did implement some measures before Memorial Day, such as the wayfinding signs, the Highway 17 pavement markings to get people back to the freeway. Additionally, we did do some reconfiguration of the intersection on Santa Cruz Avenue and Main Street to help flow the traffic through there better. Additionally, this past weekend, we also did do a closure of Massal and Tate at Highway 9 to help keep traffic out of the Almond Grove. However, we have not yet moved forward with the proposed implementation of the closure of Santa Cruz Avenue at Highway 17. We are recommending putting this closure in place and doing this at Wood Road. The reason we are recommending doing this at Wood Road is because that is town right-of-way, so we would not have to ask for a Caltrans encroachment permit. Additionally, we believe it would be less impactful to the nearby businesses. It does also allow us enough room for a turnaround so that if vehicles do find their way down there, they would be able to get out of there and get turned back up north on Santa Cruz. The closure is proposed to be on a Saturday and a Sunday from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. We have had discussions with County Fire on this closure. They are supportive of it as long as it is continuously, we have staff out there manning that closure just in case there is some sort of emergency so that we can take it down and they can get through. We would be putting out advance notification about the closure. We would also be talking to Waze so that they could get it in their database that we were putting the closure in place. Additionally, the day of the closure, we would be putting out message board signs letting people know that the closure was in place. Now, it is important to note that there are risks involved with putting this closure in place. It could actually lead to significant congestion in the downtown. It could also lead to congestion in other areas of the town. For example, people trying to find their way back, to the freeway and other on-ramps. The other risk is, of course, they could also find other areas to cut through. So there might be new locations of cut-through traffic that develop. However, if we do see significant problems developing, we would be able to remove that closure. Now, the pilot program is resource intensive. We are recommending taking funding from the fiscal year 16-17 CIP cut-through traffic project. We would complete the closure with a traffic control company. We are recommending implementation on the weekend of July 16th and 17th. This would allow us to enough time to get the appropriate notification out, also time to arrange for the closure, and also to get the contract in place for these services. And I am available to answer any questions.
Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So why are we waiting till July 16th or 17th? I'm sure we're going to have a lot of people screaming, say, July 4th weekend.
So July 4th weekend, we have some concerns putting a pilot in place on a weekend where we may have an extraordinary traffic event. Ultimately, that could cause the failure of the pilot. So we'd like to put it in place on maybe a more typical summer traffic type of weekend. So that is our goal.
Mr. Rennie?
A couple more. I don't think you mentioned it. For the record, what are the hours of the closure? Because I've gotten emails from residents thinking it was going to be closed all weekend, Friday through Sunday.
So the closure would be Saturday and Sunday from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m.
And another one, so people will still be able to get off of 17th heading north even during the closure. And one last one, this is probably for Chief Frisbee. So if somebody drives through the cones and just gets on the highway, is that a ticketable offense? Or drives up the left side where the cars are supposed to be exiting, is that a ticketable offense? If the mic ever works.
Yes, most definitely, that would be a ticketable offense. The issue being is we're going to have to be present to issue that citation in many cases. What they are proposing is that we have a private company there. So for sure that would be a citable offense. I would anticipate that many of the people who do that would probably get away with it initially.
And that's because you're not planning to have any extra staffing for this, but in your usual beats, you may patrol past there sometimes.
Correct. I mean, if we did it on the 4th or any other weekend initially for the pilot, to my opinion, it's going to be a significant impact. So it would be a part of our work plan. Officers would, that would be a directed patrol when they weren't responding to calls for service. That would be a priority directed patrol. So it would depend upon the volume of calls for service that we had on how often we would be able to be there. But yes, if that answers your question.
Thank you. If I could ask one more.
Mr. Rennie?
So, Ms. Peterson, why are we only doing one weekend pilot? I'm a little bit worried that it may take the first weekend for people to figure out it's there. And so all we see are the problems. We don't see the starting of it working if we don't do it several weekends and kind of the word gets out that you can't get through there.
So ultimately, we were just proposing to do it one time to see how it went. And of course, it is up to council if you wanted to try to have us implement this more often. We could certainly see if we could do that.
Ms. Jensen.
Sort of a follow-up to Mr. Rennie's question with respect to July 16th. It strikes me that if you're going to have a pilot to figure out that it's going to work, you have to do it when you know there's going to be a problem. So it doesn't make sense to me to have a pilot when you think there's not going to be a problem, but that's just an observation. My real question is, on April 24th, when Los Gatos did its Spring into Green event, North Santa Cruz was closed. The area around the plaza was closed. There was rock climbing walls. So you couldn't get on to South 17 from anywhere in Los Gatos in any event. That seemed to be fine. I thought it was a lot of fun. I want to bring back the rock climbing wall. But why couldn't the town do something like that? Because it strikes me that if you're going to close a road, when we did this last year, we had complaints from business owners. No one can come to our business. Complaints from residents who couldn't get back to their houses, et cetera, et cetera. But it strikes me that if you closed it and you had an event that was fun, that people wanted to come to, you could encourage them using downtown businesses. You could encourage them going to downtown eateries. You could have something that was a town event. You could make it a tradition in Los Gatos, just like they closed down the Embarcadero in San Francisco on Sundays, and you have the Walk Sundays or whatever it is. But, I don't recall there being a big lead up to us closing all those things, or there being any issue or hiring, companies, et cetera, et cetera. Why couldn't we just have an event on the weekend that was coincided with the farmers market or something like that? Do it on the 4th of July, incorporate our 4th of July thing into it, throw some sand on the plaza, make people think it's a beach. Do something like that, so that there's actually a benefit for the town that comes out of it versus us barricading off ourselves. So that's kind of a really long question. So why couldn't something like that work?
Well, I would just say that the Spring into Green event, which was a great event, and I think it was very successful, it actually was very resource intensive. Ultimately, we could, try to see if there was some sort of event that, we could put forth to do some sort of closure. However, I think what we were trying to do is put something forward that we thought we could do most expeditiously.
I know that we are just, I do have speakers, but if we still have questions of staff. Ms. Sayak.
The first question, understanding we have speakers, is the first time that we pilot this, do we have to wait until July? I know that in the staff report there was some discussion about waiting until the budget goes into effect, but I believe in order to see a true pilot work, you actually need to see the trend. And so I'd actually like to see more than one, and I'd like to see it happen sooner rather than later so that we can actually look at how we can utilize the end of our summer and put some of these measures into place sooner. So that's the first question I have, and then I'll wait till after public comment for the others.
And I'm going to join in so you can do it all at one time. I also have the question about why are we waiting till July 16th, 17th? You answered as a staff report, but we do, I think, we have funding prior to July 1st. Why can't we do it prior to July 1st? And everything else, I'll wait till comments.
The capital budget that you just approved under item number 10 identifies $215,000 in the cut-through traffic mitigation program. So it would really be from that source that we would be funding the cut-through traffic or the proposed closure. There's clearly dollars available for multiple weekend closures, so that's something we can look at. Obviously, there's trade-offs. That means that we're not going to be able to do other things, and we would need to see to what extent the closures of Massal and Tate are already accommodated in the $215,000. So that's reason why we aren't starting prior to July 1st. The notion of doing events is something that we could also look at. Ideally, we would love to have a partner to assist us with that. It is very resource intensive, as the town engineer mentioned, in terms of planning and executing a particular event, but maybe we can do something at a smaller scale. We did use our message boards prior to the Spring into Green just to alert people that we would be closing those portions. So again, advance notification was part of that effort. But we can look at the option of an event. But regardless, it would take a little bit of planning in terms of what are the activities, what are we going to do. And maybe we try it. We did get some feedback from Spring into Green that rather than closing that section of Main Street between University and Santa Cruz, that perhaps we would want to close South Santa Cruz between Main Street and the street by where the post office is. So we might try a different location for a fun event for the town. But basically, we're waiting for this new budget fiscal year to go into effect before we try these options.
Before I recognize Ms. Sayak, I was under the impression or recollection that this council authorized funding in 15-16 for traffic control.
I think some of that may have already been expended with the activities that we did last summer. So we did not have a budget item a year ago. So it was the interim town manager who took the initiative to make those investments. So we did that essentially and absorbed it. And at mid-year, we made the adjustments to make our budget whole. So that was an upfront cost. Now we're trying to plan more deliberately and make sure that we have ample notification and dollars in place.
Ms. Sayak?
Real quick, you mentioned events. Is it possible on Sundays just to shift our farmers market over one street so that it is on South Santa Cruz and it serves the dual purpose of having an event there and somewhat closing the street?
We could certainly work with the vendor and see if that's a possibility. Thank you.
Okay. And then the second thing I want to mention, and again, I want to hear public comment, is the 383 that we had just set aside in a prior discussion that we didn't want to allocate for PCIs until we actually got more information. I was thinking in the back of my mind that that's something that we could also potentially save for this effort should the council determine we wanted to put more resources into it.
I'd also like to make another comment, if I could, about the multiple closures. I think Caltrans actually does come into the equation at some point. So I think they are, we have talk to them informally about this closure. I think if we're talking about multiple continuous closures, that they're going to want to be part of that conversation, and it could end up, the closures could end up looking different based on that conversation with Caltrans.
You raise another question then. If we assume that this council wants to go forward with the closure of Santa Cruz onto 17, and if we take a leap of faith and think that it's going to be better than the town was on Memorial Day, shouldn't we be asking asking Caltrans what they want to do? Or do we have any idea?
Well, I think it's although there has been some precedent for Caltrans closing some on-ramps, it's been very few and far between, and they don't tend to be supportive of that. But we certainly, have started the conversation with them. We've started with this first initial pilot program. If we're talking about, continuous ongoing, we would just need to continue that discussion.
Well, since I would be personally looking at it, if we're going to do it at all, to be looking at it for the rest of the summer, if Caltrans isn't going to let us do it, then shouldn't we know? Or if it's illegal, shouldn't we know?
So again, I think that we had initially approached them talking informally about a pilot, not a sort of a continuous ongoing closure. And I would just reiterate that we would have to bring them into the conversation. I can't ultimately predict how they would react. Perhaps they could be supportive of it, but we would need to have that conversation.
Well, let me switch my question then to Mr. Schultz. Is it illegal for a town to close off one of its streets if that street, and then the next part of the question, if that street is an on-ramp to a highway?
No, we can do it. There's nothing that prevents us from closing off the streets, just as been stated. We've done that for the festival we've had. We've closed it. If you go back in time when the Brazilians were here, we closed streets. So if it's our right of way, our streets, we can do that.
And does it make any difference if we're closing it for one Brazilian weekend as opposed to several Los Gatos summers?
I believe that we have the ability under our police powers for health and safety purposes to be able to close our streets where we have either owned them in fee or we own them in right of way.
All right, thank you. I'm going to ignore any other questions, so these people who may want to still be here and talk to us can do that. The first card I have is Kevin Fellini.
Hello. I'd like to thank the council for letting me speak and also for prompt responses to my letters a couple of weeks back. You've covered most of the things I really wanted to touch on today, but I really did want to touch on a couple for emphasis a little bit. The size of the issue, you may know, I walk all the neighborhoods, and it's a great pleasure for me. It was startling and scary. Almond Grove, Glen Ridge, everything. I talked to somebody last weekend who lives on Pennsylvania on the corner, and she scoped it out for me very nicely. On the 29th, she clocked one car coming down Pennsylvania Avenue between Wissahickon and Walnut. The time to travel that one, not quite city block, 33 minutes. So if we're worried about turnarounds or anybody getting stuck in town when we start an experiment, worry not, it can't get worse. It was like something out of a Hitchcock movie, and you can imagine Tippi Hedren scared, trying to find shelter. This problem's not going to reverse. There are more people in the valley every day. They found the beach. They found our town as a way to get through. That's not going to go anywhere. And let's be clear. Nobody gets to Santa Cruz faster because they came through Los Gatos. No matter where they start, they end up in exactly the same spot. So coming through our town is not a solution. I'm glad we're looking at doing this in different ways. And finally, I'm glad I heard what I just heard, but I look at it this way. This is our battlefield because it's our town, and the cars are coming through. If we're going to have to fight with the cars or fight with Caltrans, I say, please pick the battle with Caltrans. We'll back you up. Let's do what we can. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Questions? No, thank you, sir. Lynn Williams. Who will be followed by Mary Martin.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for letting us speak. I agree with everything that was just said. I need to understand if the council has looked at Nextdoor emails. Are you all on that? I only get one nodded head. All right. So Nextdoor email is a local kind of discussion bulletin board that you sign on to, and you can read the discussions. And I think the police department puts notices out. It's sort of a public forum, and this has been one of the major subjects. I'm going to tell you a story. I live up on Vista Del Monte, which you'd think would be kind of free of this problem. I went to go to town going up Vista Del Mar and Spreckles to come down Loma Alta, thinking I would miss all the Los Gatos. No. Waze is now sending them through my neighborhood, which is so far off, it's really strange. And I could not get past Eastfield Ming Kwang. We turned around at Eastfield Ming Kwang and went back home. Did not go to any of the businesses in downtown that I had been planning to go to. So my vote also is do not wait until July 16th. That's halfway through the summer. Get the word out that every single weekend during every single summer, there will be no way to get through Los Gatos and back on 17 South. Come here to shop, come here for farmers market. I love the idea of moving the farmers market or encouraging more farmers to come and fill Santa Cruz Avenue South right there. It'll make our farmers market more profitable for the farmers. It'll be lovely, and it won't cost us a contractor. We won't have to hire somebody to watch the closure on Sundays. So we'd only need somebody on Saturdays, if that, and could always make sure that the farmers market might not go past Broadway, and then any emergency vehicles have a way around if they need to. I want to agree with Council Members Rennie and Sayak on both of your comments. I'm not going to add to it. They were really good. I think the whole thing is the psychology of it, to let as many people know in advance. We have 3 weekends until July 4th to put up signs through town, letting people know there will not be access on July 4th weekend or any other weekend after that, and put in ads in the local papers, in the Mercury News, online, any other way to get the news out. But once people have experienced it, we may have one bad weekend. That's me? Okay. Thank you for letting me speak.
Do we have questions
Any
for Ms.
questions?
Williams? Seeing none, thank you. Mary Martin.
I'm Mary Martin, and I live on Vista Del Monte. The Saturday of Memorial Day weekend, I walked downtown because I could not possibly have gotten there. And there were so many parking spaces available. So these people are just going right through town. Nobody's stopping to eat. Nobody's stopping to shop because they'll lose their place. So if we're going to be a funnel to Santa Cruz, I really hope we do it sooner than later to put up the barrier. And I also wonder if you could cooperate with Caltrans to get those Amber Alert signs saying, when the Bay Bridge is going to be closed for months in advance. We're hearing about it here. That they could put up a sign saying, don't cut through Los Gatos, stay on the freeway, you'll get there faster. Too many words, but anyway, you get the idea. And so I'm hoping that this happens soon and frequently. Thanks.
Thank you. Angelia Dorner. And she will be followed by Catherine, looks like, Summers.
Hello, Angelia Dorner, proud resident of the Almond Grove. I had a great time this last Friday because I saw so many people at Home Depot getting all the stuff that they needed to get for their gardens to work in their yards over the weekend. So many people at Safeway getting the provisions for the barbecues and everything else on Friday afternoon because they knew they were not going to be able to leave their homes on the weekend. But seriously, I mean, I really did run into so many people doing that. It was it was pretty funny. But seriously, I'm not going to share the stories about how many cars and stuff, but what I'm really concerned about, Chief Frisbee, is the hostility between residents and cars, drivers, etc. The Sunday of Memorial Day weekend was really, really bad. And I just am more concerned about road rage situations. I'm concerned about sitting ducks. Something as petty as people jumping out of the cars and stealing oranges right in front of a resident out of her backyard, going, chopping fences, the resident not knowing what to do, or something more serious, people in cars actually being stopped and being robbed. I mean, it'd be pretty darn easy because the guy could just run away and no one would be able to chase him. But I think that the first thing, I'm thrilled at $7,000 a weekend instead of $7,000 a day. We do have the funding. I believe that it's June 7th now. You were waiting for funding July 1 to do it July 15th. That's 14 days. So if you get approval right now, you can be ready by the 21st of June, meaning the first weekend for closure could be June 25th, which is one weekend prior to July 4th. And if you count from June 25th through Labor Day, that's 11 weekends for a total of $77,000. We have that in the budget, and I think that's what needs to be done. The first closure, we talked about that. Okay. Notification before people get here. That is the biggest thing. We have so many opportunities for notification. We can start right now. Get on the bulletin boards at Google, eBay, Apple. Get with Nextdoor, which is based out of San Francisco, and have them do a global post throughout the whole Bay Area. Have a quarter-page ad in the Mercury. Get on the radio. Have a town rally in the park, just like Town Not City did when they were fighting North 40 out here. Have it right there at the park, advertising what we're going to do, and be sure that we get the media there. That should be a pretty easy thing to do. I'm more than happy to participate in getting that done. I think town events, let's be a town. Let's have ice cream socials on Saturday and Sunday. I think there could be a different service club each weekend that could take on the goal of making sure that they've got ice cream out there. Maybe some red, white, and blue every single weekend would really be nice. And I know there are a lot of neighborhoods talking about Nextdoor that would take a weekend as well. And one last thing.
You're trying to go over your 3 minutes.
Yeah.
We'll look at something on the wall.
Mm-hmm. That's it. Next, June 14th is Flag Day. Please be sure to fly the red, white, and blue.
Thank you, Angelia. Catherine, again, it's Somers or Soames?
Summers.
Summers.
And I'm here to represent the Chamber of Commerce. I've been consulting there for the last couple months, and I would be remiss if I did not support our member businesses. I'm sure you've heard some of their concerns about the closure of that entrance to Highway 17. And I have received multiple phone calls working at the Chamber of Commerce that that closure last year caused a significant decrease in revenues for those businesses. I've had many of them. We've actually had a few conversations with the Chamber where I've had a lot of the downtown business owners come, and that was the number one concern for the summer was how can I come down and help convince the town council that they cannot possibly close that road. So while I understand that traffic is really bad, I deal with it myself every weekend because I live in town right up the hill, and even to get down from the hill down into town takes a long time. But I do think to appease everybody that is in town, we do either need to present it in a way that's not just like, hey, businesses, we're going to close the town and we're going to really mess with you again this summer. We need to, I love Ms. Pravetti's idea of possibly having an event. The Chamber would be very excited about having an event and really trying to build it up for the businesses so that it's a win-win for everybody. I also I really appreciated what you said, Ms. Sayak, about having really having a formal discussion of what else we might be able to do, because I don't necessarily know if the road closure is it. I mean, maybe there are, some crosswalks that we haven't looked at that we could close. I mean, I get ideas every day sent to me about what people think we should do. So to just come straight at it and say, we're going to close this road, and not now just once, but perhaps the whole summer, is going to be a really big deal, and I think you're going to upset a lot of people.
Don't leave, because it looks like you have some questions. But I have business owners and property owners talk to me on this issue too, and that's why it would have been really nice if you had specific members come with specific input. But so be it. I had a restaurant owner on Santa Cruz. First of all, I have observed the same thing that the speakers observed, which is empty parking spaces on the street. 1. 2, I have been told by a restaurant owner who is on Santa Cruz Avenue that he doesn't get people just stopping and going in, while the traffic is going by. That people aren't doing that. They're just going on to get to 17. And then I had, the third property owner, business owner, first was opposed to it, and then said that it was acceptable if it's for a limited amount of time on Saturday and Sunday, and so therefore allows him to have the evening, which is what this proposal is. So if I could make a suggestion to your membership, if we could have specific businesses with specific input, it would be very helpful.
Yes, this is my first time coming to one of these, so I didn't actually know that this was on the agenda, so I wasn't really prepared. So next time I will definitely bring some of those members. And I agree with everything you said. I mean, I've had both sides of the conversation. And one of the things that the Chamber has decided to do this summer is to perhaps have, go back, I think a couple of years ago you did the second Saturdays where you had sidewalk sales, and you had, you did something to bring people downtown. You talked about ice cream socials. It was really to get the townspeople, back down and bring them down. And so then the road closure wouldn't be as big of a deal, because you'd still have pedestrians walking around and shopping in the shops and eating in our restaurants. So I just think it's an opportunity to really work together and to celebrate the community as opposed to, I think so. It's just all about the approach of how we close those roads.
Ms. Sayak.
Thank you for your input. Because we did hear this last summer when we put the message boards on the freeway, we did get 2 business owners come and say that the language, the messaging was not very welcoming. Please don't get off the freeway. And so there were people who wanted to come off, not to cut through, but just wanted to partake and were afraid to get off. So I think that was one key thing that I heard last summer. The messaging has to be something that is welcoming but clear. Mm-hmm. I don't know how we're going to do it, but I mean, that's something clearly where we can work with businesses on. But what I'd love to hear specifically is the idea of if there are specific events. Let's say we move the farmers market. Let's say farmers market transitioned into Jazz on the Plaza. I mean, those are very specific welcoming events that we encourage people to participate in that would add the second benefit of preventing cut through. Like, I'd love to hear more feedback on those ideas rather than just a barricade. That doesn't seem welcoming.
Yes, no, and I completely agree with you. I think those are the conversations that are probably better to have sooner than later, because as the Chamber, we would love to be the conduit of good news about what the council is doing to help remedy the summer traffic situations to benefit everybody. And I think if we do it the right way, we'll get their support, and I know we probably have some of their support, but it would just be nice to have the whole town's support and the whole business communities as to what we can do to make it better for everybody this summer.
Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector, and perhaps this is not really a question either. I have been in town talking to the residents. Some of the ones that Ms. Sayak mentioned last year came and complained, and we didn't close the road last year. We've never tried this. What we did is, as Ms. Sayak said, put up a bunch of signs that implied Los Gatos is closed, or even if you know it's not closed, you can't get here. So, and I've in previous council meetings mentioned to staff that this year we need to be really careful about that. So my first point was I don't think the road's been closed. The other thing I would mention is the Route 9 is going to be open, so there's still going to be a ton of traffic that's going to probably still come down Winchester, Los Gatos Boulevard, Route 9. They're just not going to be through that piece of downtown. They're going to be right next to it. And when I pointed that out to these same store owners that want people passing by, because one of them, she says that they do stop. I couldn't get to Santa Cruz, so I stopped and shopped. It was okay with her. She thought this would still be fine as long as we don't have these messages that sort of say don't come to Los Gatos. So, like I said, this is maybe not really a question, but feel free to respond.
I think you're exactly right. I think, in fact, one of the comments that I've gotten is like, don't make, I think some of those signs on the highway, don't get off. If you're going to the beach, don't, we made ourselves look really exclusive as though we didn't want anybody to come through town, when really the business owners and the restaurateurs, we do want people to stop here. We just want people who want to come and park and visit our streets and our stores. So I think, again, it is all about the messaging. So I just caution, if we can just maybe work together and put a positive spin on it and capitalize on the summer traffic somehow, I think it would be good for us all.
Thank you. I have no other cards. If you want to speak on this item, please come and bring us a card. Maria Risto.
Hi, sorry. Maria Risto, 85 Broadway. So on transportation and parking, we do get regular updates on what was happening with the beach traffic, and one of the messages that was received loud and clear was that it did impact the downtown business, some downtown businesses, when the signs on the freeway said local traffic only, and people misunderstood that. And one of the resolutions was those signs were not going to go back up. So one suggestion I have is when they do the signage for some type of closure at South Santa Cruz, the sign should be positive. They should be, last exit, along Highway 9, last exit to Santa Cruz is at Highway 9 or something, so people know that. I love the idea of having an event an expansive event that would then unfortunately remove access from South Santa Cruz. One of the alarms I had initially is that if you close the section of Santa Cruz Avenue between Main Street and Broadway, that doesn't cut off any of the Almond Grove cut-through traffic, because they go through the Almond Grove and they come around and they go down Broadway and they can get back on. However, and that's what we've always had. I mean, Broadway was bumper to bumper Memorial Day weekend. The good news is we are going to be under construction. Our entire street is going to be torn asunder in about a week or two, and our street will be closed to all but residential traffic. So I don't know how that'll be enforced, but we're only going to have half a street at a time, one-way traffic. And so that is actually going to eliminate beach traffic from my street anyway. It's going to eliminate a lot of things, but like sleep and cleanliness. I'll be covered in dust. But that street then would still be available for emergency vehicles. And the only concern I would then have is how people will get to the Meadows or to anything south, the Rural Supply Hardware. There could be some unintended consequences of hurting the toll house and rural supply. So I think that was why Parks and Public Works was looking at the closure south of the toll house. But if we can do some other things, I think if we did find a way to kind of cut off traffic in town on Santa Cruz Avenue, Sundays would be great if the farmers market expanded in some direction. On Saturdays, I was thinking there's probably still some wine walks left, and maybe a wine walk would involve a closure of a block or two on Santa Cruz Avenue. So I think there's a lot of good ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none, thank you, ma'am. Okay, just go ahead, give us your name. Go ahead.
Hi, Natalie Ladd. I think it would be wonderful for us to do the pilot program before 4th of July, preferably one weekend before. And then ultimately, after we do the pilot, we've got to figure out what the conclusion is. And one of the things I was thinking is, do we even really know how much traffic goes down Santa Cruz onto the freeway? When we were doing the Hillbrook study, we put those tubes down and we counted how many cars go through. I've actually researched that before, and we could find out like what time of the day, how many cars, what the speed limit is, and perhaps we should take a look at those numbers during regular week, in the evening, traffic both ways. So when we do the pilot, we could look at some real information. What if it's 5,000 regularly and it's 20,000? Can we then go to Caltrain and say, this is what's happening to our roads? So I'm requesting that we go one step further and gather the information so we can make a better conclusion at the end of the pilot.
Let me follow up with that because I want to get clarity. Are you saying get the pre-numbers being like tomorrow, or the pre-numbers being what happened on Memorial Day?
Both. The pre-numbers, the regular weekends, the 4th of July weekend, all of it. So we have a real idea of what's happening.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you. All right, I have no other cards. I can't. I'm going to once again encourage you because this slows us down.
Sorry. Hi.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm Diane Hunter at 22 Pleasant Street. Thank you. I wasn't sure I was going to speak because I wondered if someone would cover it, and it wasn't covered. So, one, thank you for bringing this on the agenda. It obviously is a hot issue for a lot of people, and I'm on Nextdoor, and I've seen a lot of the comments there. I live across the street from the high school, so getting around town was pretty challenging that one weekend. What was interesting to me is that last weekend wasn't as challenging at all. So it really was that one weekend, and then I'm expecting 4th of July to be really extensive, and then Labor Day. And then, yes, there's traffic in between, but it was surprising that I actually was able to move around pretty freely last weekend. When I was out and about. But for those weekends when it's high impact, my concern is when there's an emergency. So I have a child who has health issues, and if I were to need to take him somewhere, to take him to a hospital, it would have been, I don't know how I would have done that. We were really stuck. And so we walked downtown, which was great. But if I needed to get somewhere, or if I needed emergency vehicles to come to my home, I don't know how that would happen. So I don't know if that's been addressed or if that's been considered. I would hope that it would be. And I've lived here since 1994 and definitely seen the traffic increasing, and I'm guessing because Waze is providing that information. So yes, maybe last year it wasn't as heavy, but it felt like this year it was exponentially heavy. So I'm asking that to also be considered in all the decisions.
Questions for Ms. Hunter? Seeing none, thank you, ma'am. All right, is there anybody else who wants to speak to us on this agenda item? Seeing no one coming forward, I will now close the public testimony of this hearing and look to the council and Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I've been thinking about this for a long time. First of all, I want to say it amazes me that on 3-day weekends, people choose to spend 2 of those 3 days sitting in their cars. However, their cars are like rolling hotel rooms. They can probably watch satellite TV and everything else, so they got the air conditioning turned on, and maybe they like doing that. I did also hear from business owners who were concerned about losing a lot of business last summer, as well as the directional signs that we put out. And I like the idea of positive messaging if that's the way we're going to go. I had suggested, stop and shop, park here, those types of positive messages to encourage people not just to drive through, but to actually get out of their car and get some relief and spend some money in our town. In reference to closing the entrance to Highway 17 by the toll house, I hear that over and over and over again from not just the many letters we get, but many residents in the community. And I like the idea of throwing the 4th of July party out there instead of the park this year, but that's up to the mayor, I think, or the staff to decide. But that would be one way we could test that. But if we throw a party, we have to be prepared to accommodate the party as well. That costs money. So if we throw a party or we throw a farmer's market and everybody decides, hey, let's go, if we put positive messaging signs that says, roads closed, farmer's market in downtown Los Gatos, everybody might try to swoop there, and we don't know what the ramifications that would be. Also, it costs money to do that as well. I liked the idea, one of the speakers mentioned counting the data and finding out exactly what we're up against. One idea I've been holding on to for a long time, though, and I think this might be the key. If we're going to spend $200,000 just to do these temporary things every year to try to stop this, we should probably consider putting some nice decorative gates in on Ridgecrest, Tate, and Masole, and consider only closing those decorative gates on these types of days that we know there's going to be an onslaught. It's not going to close North Santa Cruz. It's not going to close the traffic to North Santa Cruz. That will affect the businesses, but it will protect the residents. Here we are. We're going to be redoing the Almond Grove streets. This is a wonderful opportunity to make kind of a real nice antique decorative gate or something that can be closed only to residents and their guests on those days, and or open, only open to residents and their guests on those days, and try to avert the traffic from just cutting through all those neighborhoods. And we can control that. That's something we can control. We can have people go out there, our PD, or perhaps volunteers from the neighborhood, where we can just shut them and open them. They would be open 99% of the year, but we would get those days where we know people are coming. So it's just one thought I had that might be better than just trying to put up all these temporary measures all the time, and it would protect the residents, and it might add some unique charm to the area as well.
Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I have a few more questions of staff, actually. So I traded emails with some mountain residents, and one of their questions was, could there be, it looks like you're planning to staff somebody there the whole time with the cones in case somebody runs through them, they're going to put them back up, so forth. There's a question whether we could give out passes to mountain residents so they could go through. Is that open a can of worms? Have that been thought about?
Well, I think that if you're going to close it, we probably, it'd be very difficult to man that, who's coming through, and then you're going to be getting lots of cars coming off of 17. They're going to be piled up there, trying to get in because there'll be people being turned around going the other direction, so they're going to have to filter slowly in. It would be very difficult, to man something like that because I think it would be very congested in that location.
Okay, next question.
Further question, Mr. Rennie?
Thank you. So you chose to close it from 9 to 3, and I can't recall when rural supply opens, but 9 seems a little early to me. I don't think traffic is bad at 9. I think we might consider starting at 10, so there's more time for people in the mountains to get into rural supply and get back up the highway before we close it on them. Why 9?
I think the reason that 9 was chosen is we wanted people to experience it and get on their apps and tell everybody, yes, it is true, it's closed. So before the huge impact of traffic started coming through, everybody would already be aware of it, via their apps.
So third question. I don't see anything in here that tells that you're thinking about a permanent solution or how this leads to a permanent solution.
Well, I think that we wanted to just do the pilot to even see if it worked, because there is the possibility we could put the pilot in and it could be something that doesn't work, and we end up getting lots of complaints from businesses or residents or people that live in the mountains. So the thought was, let's put a pilot into place, let's check it out, let's see how it does, let's see what the reaction is, and then we can move forward with maybe solutions of continuing it or other ideas of more permanent solutions.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could just add, I think it's important to note that this is a real serious issue, and all of the ideas that Council is currently discussing will probably, if things work well, will reduce the impact, but we will probably never be successful in absolutely eliminating this entirely. So I think permanent solutions maybe more around the notion of, are there fun events that the town does during the summer, as opposed to, we're going to somehow fix this permanently. So just to manage expectations, I think we want to make sure that we can address it and improve the quality of life for our residents and improve the business community. But I think we will unlikely solve this 100%.
Further questions, Mr. Leonardis?
One further comment I forgot to mention. If we were to pursue an idea like the gates on Ridgecrest, Tate, and Masol, all of the navigation softwares, all of the Waze softwares, they would see something that would say gated road or private road or partially no through access, and it would be a permanent feature now of all navigation systems and all those types of devices. I think that is where the real battle lies in the future. So that would be another opportunity for us to consider that idea.
Further questions, discussion? Mr. Rennie. Well, actually, if you're not going to go, I'm going to go with Ms. Jensen.
Okay. I actually had a procedural question, and I'm trying to figure out, I've heard all kinds of comments, all kinds of ideas, and none of them are particularly enthusiastic about July 16th. Is the question before us approve or not approve a one-time pilot program for July 16th for this agenda item?
The question is, do we want to do a pilot closure? Staff does not have a contractor under contract yet to do this, so the earliest, we were just trying to sharpen our pencils here, listening to the commentary, the earliest we could put into place a pilot closure would be the last weekend in June. And that would be some pretty fast work and making sure that we're consistent with our procurement policy, et cetera. So that would be the earliest that we could do it. We would still not recommend doing it on July 4th for the reasons that we've described. And then we could look at multiple other options as well for throughout the summer.
So, and Ms. Jensen, if I might weigh in from the person who put it on the agenda's point of view, I'm looking for a direction from the council, considering what staff says, but not necessarily being limited to that.
Thank you. So my follow-up is, what I'm still hearing from staff is the notion of this big pilot program with personnel and companies and this and that. So if we're looking for direction, for me, that I'm not sure that that's what I'd want. I'd rather have the counters that we're talking about. I'd rather gather the information. I'd rather think about an event that could work. And because I just don't think a pilot program on a non-impacted weekend is going to teach us much of anything. And we're likely to get more complaints that's going to be, dear council, what the heck are you doing this on July 16th when you did nothing on the 4th? So I would rather be gathering information and look at lots and lots of options versus just focusing the attention on, here's what we thought, we'll do this pilot and it's going to be constructed this way and we're going to do this and we're only going to do it at a certain time to get information. To me, that's not valuable. So if that's what you're actually looking for, at least for me, I would not be ready to say that's the way to go.
All right, and I'm going to be looking for a motion from council, but my thoughts, not my motion, my thoughts is a pilot akin to the one that the staff suggested, because at least it has some direction, but I would want it prior to the 4th of July. And at this point, I'm not necessarily, so I guess that's the end of June, and I'm not necessarily prepared not to do it on the 4th of July, although my mind is open on that because I know what it's going to be like here if we don't have the closure in place. Ms. Sayak?
Thank you. I think it's very much in line with what has already said. I think for this to be effective, we need to look at more than one day, and I think we need to be looking at the trend. There will be many people who just cut through without using an app, just by habit, whether they've done it many times before or for whatever reason. And so I would very much want to start it sooner rather than later. It sounds like the end of June. I think we can identify funds, so I don't think that's necessarily a concern. I think the pilot, if the pilot of hiring a contractor and closing woods, I think you could do that on a Saturday, and you could even compare Saturday versus Sunday, Sunday versus Saturday. That could be one comparison. But I do agree with what Ms. Ladd said is we need to know upfront what our metric of success is. And we need counters, we need feedback, and we need to be able to compare and contrast. I think another option that we should consider, going back to the fun positive, is one option is let's extend the farmers market one street over. You can easily extend the farmers market and then it'll transition into Jazz on the Plaza on Sundays. And you could even do a comparison. Are Sunday traffic better than Saturday? I think there's different ways to look at how to solve the problem beyond just a one-time closure.
And Mr. Leonardis, just one thing following up, a couple things. First of all, we don't have Jazz on the Plaza on Sunday, and it's the wrong place. And the other thing, I'm going to go to Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So I brought this up earlier. What would be, and maybe this is a question for staff, the feasibility of moving the 4th of July celebration to the town plaza this year and closing off part of North Santa Cruz? And
we are currently in the planning phases working with the service clubs. I believe, for example, the veterans group was looking forward to having a table to promote some of their activities. We would have to do some pretty fast work because I believe staff is well underway with promoting the location. We haven't yet launched that formal promotion, but if it's the will of the council, we'll have to do some very quick work. The 4th of July, I believe, is on a Monday, so that would be a one-day event only. It's not a weekend. It's not multiple days. It's just a one-time, one-day event, but it is a morning through the afternoon activity.
Mr. Rennie?
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So I think to keep it simple, if I were to make a motion, I would say I want to see a pilot the weekend before 4th of July. I want to see it I want to see it on the 4th of July also. To collect data when the weekend's not going to be very bad only doesn't make sense to me. If we know the 4th of July is going to be a disaster, so if this is a disaster, we've not lost anything. Potentially it could be better, and we have a weekend to compare it to. So I would say that. And then the third part of a motion would be for staff to develop some metrics so they can measure whether things got better or worse. I realize it's going to be difficult to compare a 4th of July weekend to a non-4th of July weekend, but I kind of would leave it up to them to figure out some metrics to let us, so we know, did things get better? I would keep it simple to that.
Is that a motion?
Yeah, let me make it a motion, please.
All right, the motion I hear is begin the project at the end of June. We have the funds, and the one thing that's not clear to me is the metrics. I mean, since I'm one of the people who is imprisoned in downtown, I can tell you that on some weekends, like Memorial Day, you can't do anything. And on some weekends, as we heard, like last weekend, you can do some stuff. So what kind of metrics are you looking for?
Well, that's why I'm not sure I have a solution on the metrics. Maybe staff has something in mind. We talked about counters, but we can't just do it and then kind of count how many complaints we get. I'm not sure that's going to be reliable.
Thank you. Yes, so we actually already do have some counts, and we have already been planning on collecting counts, prior to the pilot closure and during the pilot closure as well. So we've already have a plan in place to get the traffic data to be able to assess how successful it was.
And will you count number of turnarounds? In other words, you're going to have signs up to tell people, hey, it's closed, don't come down here. They're going to do it anyway. So maybe you can also count how many people are not paying attention, and maybe after a few weekends you see that number drop. Could we do something like that also?
Yes, at all the critical locations we will be counting.
All right, so the metrics you're talking about are the counts that are currently going on and expanded as staff explained?
Yes.
All right, then I am seconding that motion. A question I have is that assuming that we begin at the end of June and then we go through the 4th of July and then we go to the weekend after the 4th of July, this actually could be very interesting metrics. What is staff's input, if any, as to whether or not we should go beyond that time frame, or should we, I was going to say come back to the council, but we can't do that. What are your thoughts as to what we do after that second closure in July?
Ultimately, I think from staff's perspective, we would like to have the analysis of what actually happened and if it was successful. How we communicate that to the council, I'm not totally clear on because we won't be meeting in July, but
I have an idea. Let me ask Ms. Pravetti. Having some familiarity with our agendas, I think we could bring this back on the first meeting in August.
Yes, we could do that for August 2nd. I think the question would be, July is a long month, so we do have, I think, 5 weekends total in July, so we would have 2 weekends without the pilot. So we would have weekends with and then weekends without, so you would have the ability to do the compare and contrast that you've requested, and we could certainly put this on the agenda for August 2nd, and then that would inform what actions, if any, we'd want to take for Labor Day.
And so you're assuming that the motion encompasses the end of June, the 4th of July, the weekend after the 4th of July, and then stops.
That is my interpretation, but open to modification.
Mr. Rennie, is that your motion?
Yes, please.
And it'll come back to us in the first meeting in August. All right, that's the complete motion that is on the table. Discussion. Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I mean, I think regardless of what we do, the primary objective has to be the general welfare of the public safety, their quality of life, and then the business community. Obviously, we don't want business to be affected by it either. So however data we collect, whatever we're doing, we need to look at those objectives and view things through those points of view.
Ms. Jensen.
I just had a question for the maker of the motion. So I'm considering whether to support the motion, but I want to know whether you are contemplating for the pilot closure just a barricade with a company, or you are including in the possibility of how that closure would be accomplished, that it coincide with an event. It might be expanding the farmers market, it might be a wine walk, it might be something else, but is there the possibility that one of the pilot weekends would be closed due to an event versus putting up a barricade?
So in my mind, it's not important whether it's an event or not. So if you'd like to have an event, that's okay. I have some concerns. I can't see how you can not allow access to the meadows. You've got old people that certainly can't, some of them can't walk, so they're going to, have to get up there or get out. Emergency vehicles have to get there. So, all this discussion of events, I kept wondering how we're going to do that. I don't know what you did for Spring in the Green. So the answer to your question is I'm okay with events if staff figures out how to make it work. But generally, closure either, maybe some days it's going to be an event, but I don't think we can do an event every day. Some days it can be cones.
The seconder of the motion agrees with Mr. Rennie. Conceptually, events sound great. I don't know if staff has the time between now and just a few weeks from now to put that into effect. If they can, that's great. We do have the issue with not blocking access to the businesses that are along Santa Cruz Avenue. Immediately before 17, and we also have the issue of Wood Road. Further discussion. Ms. Sayak.
Just a couple more things to add on to the motion. It doesn't have to be a part of it, but just comments. When we're talking about metrics, I heard over Memorial Day of all the safety calls that went into our dispatch. And so I think that would be another metric. I'd like to know how many calls are they decreasing? Are they not? Response time. Those, I think, are valid, objective numbers we can look at. I want to make sure that we work clearly and quickly with the chamber because of the concerns that they had last year regarding messaging. I think I heard at least consensus that we want to keep it positive versus stay out of our town. And then in terms of events, I just like events. I think anything that brings the community together is always a positive thing. The Spring into Green, all I heard were positive things. So I look to staff to look at what the right balance is. I know they're time intensive. I know PPW spent a lot of time on it. But I think a good mixture of both would give us some indication of what is more for a long-term sustainable solution rather than something that we are looking at just for the summer.
And with regard to the motion, I know that Ms. Sayok said that this was not, her comments were not necessarily a recommendation or a component of the motion, but I would ask the maker of the motion if the positive messaging component could be a part of his motion.
I completely agree with that idea. I had thought about adding those in, but then I thought I would try to keep it simple. And if council members want to add certain things, I'm definitely okay with adding that to it.
And so is the seconder of the motion. Further discussion? Seeing none. We have a motion, and if staff would please, I could read it back, but I want to hear what staff has to say and see if staff and I have the same notes.
Okay, I will give it a go. The motion on the table is to consider a pilot closure for 3 consecutive weekends, beginning the last weekend in June, the 4th of July weekend, and then the weekend after, as an option to the extent it's possible to have an event as opposed to the closure with the cones, to explore that and implement that, to collect data. Not just on traffic counts using tubes and other methods, but also collect data around public safety, quality of life, any comments or data from businesses, and that we work quickly and clearly with the chamber regarding positive messaging for the closures that are being proposed.
Maker of the motion, does that sound fine?
That's fine.
Me too. Anything further? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Good job. Thank you, council.